I got hospitalized for exhaustion and a bleeding ulcer, but no one from my family ever showed up. No visits, no phone calls checking if I was alive. There was just a text from my brother complaining his black card was declined and demanding I fix it before his car lease was due. So I stopped pretending I had a family. I logged into my banking portal and cut them all off. 3 days later, my father called me in a panic because his world was collapsing. I am Jordan Reed, 34 years old, and until that moment in the hospital, I was the invisible bankroll keeping my toxic family afloat. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever realized that the people sharing your blood are actually parasites draining your life away. Trust me, you will want to hear how I brought their fake billionaire lifestyle crashing down. The sterile smell of the emergency room and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor kept me grounded. I woke up with an IV needle taped to my hand and a dull, throbbing pain in my abdomen. The doctor told me my body had shut down. Burnout combined with a bleeding ulcer had pushed my system to the limit. Working 100-hour weeks will do that. I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. In 24 hours, the chair next to my bed remained completely empty. My phone buzzed on the plastic tray table. For a brief, foolish second, my heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was my mother, Beverly, finally calling to ask if her daughter was breathing. Maybe it was my father, Harrison, checking on me. I grabbed the device. The screen lit up with a message from my older brother, Trevor. I opened the text. It read, "Hey, the black card declined at the Prada boutique for Naomi. Fix the autopay immediately. My Porsche lease is due tomorrow." I stared at the glowing screen. A bitter laugh bubbled up from my chest and echoed in the quiet hospital room. There was no asking how my surgery went. There was no concern that I had collapsed in my office. Trevor only cared that his beautiful influencer wife could not buy another overpriced handbag. Naomi was always complaining online about how hard her life was while spending my money to project an image of luxury. She built an entire brand around being a wealthy socialite. She never knew the girl she constantly insulted for dressing poorly was the one funding her closet. My family genuinely believed I was just a low-level IT worker. They thought my father had set up some massive family trust fund years ago and that my only job was to manage the software that paid their bills. The reality was drastically different. I am the sole founder and CEO of Vanguard Analytics. I built a financial data firm from the ground up. Meanwhile, my father Harrison ran his logistics company straight into the ground 7 years ago. He was drowning in debt, too arrogant to admit failure. Instead of letting his pride shatter, I quietly stepped in. I created an anonymous family trust using my own corporate profits. For 7 long years, I secretly funneled millions of dollars into his failing business just to keep his ego intact. I funded the endless string of fake startup companies for Trevor. I paid for the extravagant trips to Paris and Milan for Naomi. I bought their cars, paid their mortgages, and funded their exclusive country club memberships. And how did they repay me? By treating me like an absolute embarrassment. My father always mocked my modest clothes and quiet lifestyle. He would tell his rich friends that I was just the dull daughter who worked behind a computer screen. I remembered the last time I tried to talk to him about feeling overwhelmed with work. He just sneered, adjusted his expensive tie, and said, "Reeds are not weak, Jordan. Stop complaining and do your job." Lying in that hospital bed, I finally realized the ugly truth. They were not my family. They were a financial drain. I was killing myself to fund the vanity of people who would gladly step over my dead body. The tears dried up instantly. A cold and absolute clarity washed over me. I sat up slightly, ignoring the pulling sensation from my IV line. I did not text Trevor back. I did not call my mother. I opened the secure offshore banking application on my phone. The screen displayed the master dashboard for the family trust account I had created. I navigated to the user management section. There were 4 auxiliary black cards attached to my primary account. One for my father, one for my mother, one for Trevor, and one for Naomi. I tapped the screen and selected all 4 profiles. A confirmation prompt popped up asking if I was sure I wanted to revoke all access. I did not hesitate. I hit confirm. Next, I went to the corporate funding module. This automated system quietly injected $250,000 every single month into the logistics company my father ran to cover his operating expenses. I deleted the recurring transfer. I froze the credit line completely. In less than 2 minutes, I turned off the financial life support they had been secretly feeding on for nearly a decade. I set the phone face down on the table, lay back against the pillows, and closed my eyes. For the first time in 7 years, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I knew the storm was coming. I knew that without my money, their entire fake reality would implode in a matter of days. I just needed to rest and heal. When the dust settled, I was going to watch their kingdom burn. 3 days in a hospital bed gives a person time to think. While nurses monitored my recovering ulcer, I dismantled my life. When the doctor signed my discharge papers, I did not call a rideshare to the rundown apartment my family thought I lived in. I maintained that fake apartment just to keep up the illusion of my meager salary. Instead, my private driver met me. I slid into the black car and gave him the address to my actual home. My sanctuary was a secured penthouse in the financial district. The private elevator opened directly into my foyer, revealing windows overlooking the city skyline. I walked across the hardwood floors, dropping my bag by the door. The absolute stillness of the space felt like a warm embrace. My family had no idea this place existed. They believed I was barely scraping by while serving as the administrative grunt for their wealth. They believed the money they burned through was the legacy of my father. They never questioned where the cash originated. I walked into my kitchen, poured cold water, and retrieved my personal phone. I had kept it turned off since revoking their access. Taking a breath, I held the power button down. The screen illuminated, and instantly the device began to vibrate violently in my hand. Notifications flooded the screen in a wave of panic. There were exactly 87 missed calls. Most were from my father Harrison, but a good portion came from Trevor and my mother Beverly. The text messages were a chaotic mix of confusion, entitlement, and outright rage. Trevor had sent a dozen messages demanding to know why his luxury car lease payment bounced. He complained that Naomi was publicly humiliated at a high-end restaurant when her card declined. My mother left voicemails sounding frantic about her country club dues. The most aggressive messages were from my father. His texts transitioned from demanding I fix a banking glitch to threatening my employment. As I stood there reading through their collective meltdown, the phone vibrated again. The caller ID flashed my father. I took another sip of water, cleared my throat, and pressed answer. I did not even get a chance to say hello. "Jordan, where the hell have you been?" Harrison bellowed through the speaker, his voice thick with unhinged fury. I had to pull the phone away from my ear to tolerate the volume. "What the hell did you do to the family accounts? My logistics fleet is entirely grounded. The corporate fuel cards are declining at every single station across the state. We have trucks sitting on the highway and clients threatening to breach contract. Fix the system right now." I listened to him hyperventilate. For my entire life, that tone of voice had conditioned me to cower and apologize. I had spent 34 years shrinking myself to accommodate his massive ego. I funded his failing logistics empire just to avoid hearing that tone of disappointment. But standing in my penthouse looking out over the city I had conquered on my own, his screaming just sounded pathetic and weak. "I am not fixing anything," I said, keeping my voice incredibly even and calm. "What are you talking about?" he shouted, the sound of papers rustling violently in the background. "You manage the trust portal. The bank is telling me the accounts are locked and the primary account holder revoked the authorization. You are the only one with the administrative passwords. Turn the access back on before I lose a shipping contract today." I leaned against my kitchen counter and smiled. "I did not touch your accounts, Dad. I just stopped paying your bills with mine." The line went dead silent. It was the kind of profound, heavy silence that happens right before a building collapses. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process my words. "What kind of nonsense are you spouting?" he finally growled, his confusion masking his sudden panic. "That trust is my money. It is the family money from my business. You are just the administrative worker I hired to manage the transfers. If you think you can hold my money hostage because you are having some kind of emotional breakdown, you are severely mistaken." "Your business has not made a profit in 7 years," I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, clinical register. "Your logistics company was bankrupt before Trevor even started his second failed application. The family trust you think you own does not exist. It is a corporate shell account funded entirely by my company. Every drop of fuel in your trucks, every designer bag Naomi owns, and the roof over your head was paid for by the daughter you call a failure." "You are lying," he spat, though his voice wavered slightly. "You do not have that kind of money. You are a low-level tech worker. You are delusional. I am calling the bank attorneys right now to report you. You are fired from the trust, Jordan. You hear me? You are fired. Do not bother coming to the family dinner this weekend. You are cut off." He was still trying to exert power he did not possess. He was trying to fire me from my own bank account. The sheer audacity of his delusion was staggering. He would rather believe I was a criminal hacker than admit his daughter was more successful than he could ever dream of being. "You cannot fire the owner, Dad," I said softly. "Have fun paying for that fuel today." I pressed the red button and ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the marble counter and took a deep, steadying breath. I had just officially declared financial war on the people who shared my blood. There was no going back. The house of cards I had propped up for 7 years was finally collapsing, and I was going to enjoy watching gravity do its work. The next morning, the fallout transitioned from digital panic to physical invasion. I was sitting at my desk in the Vanguard Analytics headquarters reviewing the quarterly earnings report. My office was a sprawling corner executive suite on the top floor of a glass skyscraper. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a private meeting area, and a custom mahogany desk that cost more than my parents' first house. My family, however, had spent the last 7 years assuming I worked in a windowless basement cubicle doing basic data entry. My executive assistant knocked lightly on the open door, looking slightly bewildered. She held her tablet tight against her chest. "Ms. Reed, there is a couple at the reception desk downstairs demanding to see you. They claim to be your brother and sister-in-law. Security was going to turn them away, but the man is threatening to call the police and report you for corporate theft." I smiled, setting down my pen. "Send them up. Let them see exactly who they are dealing with." Less than 5 minutes later, the heavy glass doors to my suite swung open. Trevor marched in, his face flushed with self-righteous anger. Right behind him was Naomi. My sister-in-law was dressed like she was attending Paris Fashion Week. She wore a tailored tweed blazer, oversized sunglasses pushed back on her head, and carried the exact crocodile leather handbag my credit card had declined the day before. Trevor stopped dead in his tracks. He looked around the massive office, his eyes darting from the panoramic view of the city to the expensive artwork on the walls, and finally to me sitting behind the massive desk. His brain was visibly struggling to reconcile the reality of this room with the pathetic image he held of his younger sister. "What is this place?" Trevor demanded, his voice dropping an octave as his confidence wavered. "Whose office are you hiding in? Did you sleep with some executive to get access to the trust?" I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and folded my hands. "I own the building, Trevor. This is my office. Vanguard Analytics is my company. Welcome to the reality you have been too blind to see for 7 years." Naomi stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. She was not going to let the truth interrupt her performance. She had an audience of nearly 1 million followers online, and she treated every human interaction like a live broadcast where she was the perpetual star and victim. "Do not play mind games with us, Jordan," Naomi sneered, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "You locked the accounts out of pure spite. You are trying to ruin my influencer brand. I had a brand deal photo shoot yesterday, and the card declined in front of the regional manager. You humiliated me. You did this because you are jealous. Jealous of what I asked calmly. Your fake life funded by my real work. Naomi crossed her arms, striking a defiant pose. She loved weaponizing her identity whenever she felt threatened, turning any personal conflict into a social justice crusade. You are just a bitter, lonely spinster who hates seeing a successful black woman thrive, she spat out. You cannot stand that I have a beautiful marriage, a massive following, and a lifestyle you could never achieve. You sit alone in your empty apartment while I am out living the dream. So you decided to steal your father's money to cut me down. It is pathetic and racist. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against her ridiculous accusations. I simply opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick bound folder. I tossed it onto the center of the desk with a heavy thud. Your beautiful marriage is built on my charity, I said, looking right into her eyes. Your luxury lifestyle is a direct result of my hard work. You are not a successful influencer, Naomi. You are a highly subsidized dependent. That card declined because I stopped paying for the illusion of your success. Trevor slammed his fist on my desk. You are a thief. You rerouted the family trust funds into your own accounts. Dad is calling his lawyers right now. We are going to have you arrested for embezzlement. I reached out and pressed a small silver button on the intercom console sitting on my desk. Security to the CEO suite, I said clearly. You cannot throw us out. Trevor yelled, his face turning an ugly shade of red. I am your older brother. I demand you unlock those accounts immediately. My car lease is due. The mortgage on our house is due. I have investors expecting me to front capital for my new app by Friday. The heavy doors opened again, and 4 large security guards stepped into the office. They moved efficiently, flanking Trevor and Naomi with professional detachment. Escort these 2 individuals out of the building, I instructed the guards. If they ever show up here again, have them arrested for trespassing. As the guard stepped forward and grabbed Trevor by the arms, he began to thrash and shout. Naomi shrieked, swatting at the guard, who gently but firmly guided her toward the door, complaining that he was ruining her designer jacket. Before they could drag him completely into the hallway, I picked up the thick folder from my desk and walked over to Trevor. I shoved the stack of papers directly into his chest. He reflexively grabbed them as the guards pulled him backward. By the way, Trevor, I said, my voice carrying down the quiet executive hallway. That mysterious angel investor who funded your last 3 failed apps, the one who gave you $1 million just so you could play CEO and pretend you were a tech genius. Trevor stopped struggling for a second, his eyes widening in sheer panic as he looked down at the financial documents in his hands. That was me, I said, delivering the final blow. I funded you through a corporate shell company just to keep you occupied and out of my way. You never had a real investor. You never had a successful idea. You are cut off. I turned around and walked back into my office, the sound of Trevor shouting in denial echoing down the corridor, until the elevator doors finally slid shut. To let the gravity of this reality properly set in, I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the crystal decanter on my credenza. I looked out over the city, feeling lighter than I ever had in my entire life. This morning had been entirely predictable and completely pathetic. I knew they would not accept a closed wallet without throwing a massive tantrum. I also knew that discovering my success would hurt them far more than losing their allowance ever could. I stood by the window and smiled, knowing the real war had just begun. The sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across my penthouse. I spent the remainder of the afternoon working in absolute peace. There were no frantic texts about maxed-out credit cards. There were no demands to fix banking portals. There was just the quiet hum of my servers and the deep satisfaction of a clean break. I poured myself a glass of red wine and walked toward my kitchen island to prepare a simple dinner. The silence was golden. It was the beautiful sound of boundaries finally being enforced. But I knew my family perfectly. I knew their entitlement ran much deeper than their pride. They would not surrender gracefully. They would escalate. Right on cue, the secure intercom on my wall chimed loudly. A red light flashed indicating an override at the lobby level. My private elevator was ascending. I tapped the security monitor. The high-definition camera feed showed 3 figures standing in the polished steel car. 2 were uniformed police officers, their faces stern and rigid. Standing directly between them, clutching a tissue to her face, was my mother, Beverly. She was wearing a drab, oversized beige cardigan over her usual expensive blouse, clearly trying to look fragile and destitute. The performance had officially begun. The heavy oak doors of my foyer clicked open. I set my wine glass down and walked to meet them. Beverly did not wait for the officers to announce themselves. She pushed past the 2 large men, her face contorted in a mask of sheer agony. She let out a dramatic, trembling gasp as she looked around my luxurious entryway. She had never seen this penthouse before. The shock of my wealth momentarily broke her character, her eyes darting toward the crystal chandelier and the imported marble floors. But Beverly was a seasoned manipulator. She recovered instantly, turning her shock into a weapon. "Look at this," Beverly cried, grabbing the sleeve of the taller officer. "Look at how she lives. This is our money. She stole our life savings to buy this ridiculous palace. We are going to be out on the street tomorrow." She buried her face in her hands, letting out a hollow, echoing sob. The taller officer stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder before looking at me with absolute contempt. "Are you Jordan Reed?" he asked, his voice heavy with authority. I nodded calmly. "I am." The second officer pulled out a notepad. "Ma'am, we received a highly distressing call from your mother. She alleges that you have illegally locked her and your father out of their primary retirement accounts. She claims you hijacked their banking portal this morning, changed the administrative passwords, and effectively committed elder financial abuse." Beverly peeked through her fingers, tears streaming down her carefully powdered cheeks. She has always been deeply troubled, officers, mentally unstable since she was a teenager. We tried to get her help. We gave her a simple job managing our family trust because we wanted her to feel useful. We trusted her completely. And now she has completely snapped. She is trying to ruin her father's logistics company out of pure delusion. She cut off her brother. She left us with absolutely nothing. We cannot even buy groceries. The performance was sickeningly good. If I did not know the truth, I would have felt sorry for her. She played the vulnerable, victimized senior citizen, perfectly leaning against the wall, as if the sheer weight of my supposed betrayal was physically crushing her. The first officer took a step closer to me, his hand resting near his utility belt. "Elder financial exploitation is a severe felony in this state, Ms. Reed. We are talking about immediate arrest, asset freezing, and mandatory federal reporting. We need you to unlock those accounts right now and return the stolen funds to your parents, or we will have no choice but to take you into custody." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I looked at the 2 men doing their jobs, completely unaware they were being used as pawns by a woman wearing a $5,000 watch, hidden under a cheap cardigan. "Officers," I said, offering a polite, relaxed smile. "I completely understand why you are here. Elder abuse is a terrible crime, and you are right to take these allegations seriously. Please step inside. Can I offer either of you a bottle of water?" The officers exchanged a confused glance. They clearly expected me to scream, cry, or resist. My absolute lack of panic threw them off balance. They stepped fully into the foyer, though they declined the water. Beverly glared at me, her fake tears drying up as she realized her ambush was not working the way she intended. Before this goes any further, I continued, keeping my tone perfectly measured and professional. "I just need to make one single phone call. It will clear up this entire misunderstanding in less than 10 minutes. The taller officer frowned but nodded. "Make it quick, but you are not leaving our sight." I picked up my phone from the counter. I bypassed the recent calls list, which was still littered with my family's desperate threats, and dialed the direct line to Donovan Hayes. He answered on the first ring. "Donovan," I said, keeping my eyes locked on my mother's rapidly paling face. "I have a bit of a situation at the penthouse. My mother has brought the police. She is officially claiming I stole the family trust and committed elder financial abuse." A low, dark chuckle came through the speaker. "She actually went through with the police report?" Donovan asked. "She did," I confirmed. "I need you to come up here right now, bring the audited files, the certified ones from the Swiss accounts and the tax returns for Vanguard Analytics from the last 7 years. Oh, and bring the corporate ownership records for my father's logistics company." "I am in the elevator," Donovan replied. "I will be at your door in 60 seconds. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. I turned back to the officers and my mother. Beverly was no longer crying. The mention of audited files and corporate records had completely shattered her fragile victim persona. She stood rigid, her eyes darting toward the door. I crossed my arms and offered her a final chilling smile. "My lawyer is on his way up," I told the officers, "and I highly suggest you get your pens ready because my mother is about to learn that filing a false police report to extort a corporate executive carries a very real, very mandatory prison sentence." The heavy brass doors of my private elevator slid open with a soft chime. The timing was absolutely flawless. Stepping into the marble foyer was Donovan Pierce. At 45 years old, Donovan possessed the kind of ruthless, sharp-edged energy that made opposing counsel sweat before a single word was spoken. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, carried a thick leather briefcase, and possessed an expression of pure, unadulterated legal violence. He was my secret weapon, the corporate shark who had helped me build Vanguard Analytics from the shadows, while my family thought I was fixing printers. "Good evening, officers," Donovan said, his voice slicing through the tense silence of my entryway. "I am Donovan Pierce, managing partner at Pierce & Associates and chief legal counsel for Vanguard Analytics. More importantly, for tonight's incredibly misguided visit, I am the personal attorney for Ms. Jordan Reed." He did not wait for the officers to respond. He strode directly to the massive glass dining table adjacent to the foyer, snapped the latches of his briefcase, and began laying out thick, bound stacks of documents. The taller officer stepped forward, clearing his throat, attempting to regain control of the room. "Mr. Pierce, we are investigating a report of elder financial abuse. Mrs. Reed here claims your client hijacked her retirement accounts and locked her out of her life savings." Donovan did not even look up from the papers. He just let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Elder financial abuse. That is quite the creative fiction, Beverly. I must commend your commitment to the performance. But the police require facts, not community theater." He tapped a manicured finger against the first stack of documents. "Officers, let us review the facts. The account Beverly Reed is referring to is entirely fictitious in the way she describes it. There is no Reed family trust containing her or her husband's life savings. What actually exists is a corporate disbursement account registered under a Delaware shell company, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Analytics." Beverly's face contorted. She lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at Donovan. "That is a lie. My husband built a logistics empire. That money is ours. Jordan just does the typing." Donovan finally looked at her, his eyes cold and devoid of any sympathy. "Harrison Reed ran his logistics company into catastrophic debt 7 years ago. He was facing bankruptcy and federal tax liens. My client, acting out of misplaced familial loyalty, created this disbursement account to quietly pay off his corporate debts, cover your exorbitant country club fees, and fund your son's embarrassing string of failed applications." Donovan picked up a certified banking ledger and handed it directly to the officers. "You can verify this yourselves. These are the audited, certified tracing records from our Swiss banking partners, complete with federal tax declarations. Every single cent in the disputed account originated from the corporate profits of Vanguard Analytics. Jordan Reed is the sole founder, sole owner, and sole contributor. Beverly and Harrison Reed have not deposited a single dollar into this account. Ever. They were simply authorized users on a corporate credit line, a privilege my client legally and rightfully revoked 3 days ago." The taller officer scanned the documents, His eyes widened as he processed the astronomical numbers and the indisputable legal stamps verifying Jordan's total ownership. He looked at the second officer, giving a subtle nod. The narrative had completely flipped. Beverly was hyperventilating now, but it was no longer an act. The reality of her exposure was setting in. She looked wildly between the officers, Donovan and me. "You cannot believe them. They fabricated these papers. She is my daughter. She owes us this money. We raised her." Donovan stepped closer to Beverly, invading her personal space just enough to assert total dominance. "What you owe the state right now, Beverly, is an explanation as to why you just committed a felony. Filing a false police report to extort a corporate executive is a severe crime. Attempting to use armed police officers as your personal collection agency because your daughter cut off your allowance is not just pathetic, it is highly illegal." The officers turned their attention to my mother. The sympathy they had shown her 10 minutes ago vanished entirely, replaced by the hardened glare reserved for criminals who waste police time. "Mom," the taller officer said, his tone turning severe. "Is this true? Did you lie to dispatch about owning these accounts?" The mask finally shattered. The fragile, weeping elderly woman evaporated, replaced by the vicious, entitled narcissist I had known my entire life. Beverly straightened her posture, her hands balling into fists. The fake tears vanished instantly, leaving her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated rage. She glared at me with a hatred so profound it could have frozen water. "You ungrateful parasite," Beverly hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "After everything we did for you, we gave you a roof over your head. We let you associate with our family name. You are nothing without us. You are just a plain, boring girl who got lucky with computers. That money belongs to the family. It belongs to Trevor." I stood completely still, absorbing her vitriol without a flinch. "You are right about one thing, Mom. I am plain. I am boring. And I am also the one holding the deed to the house you sleep in. You might want to remember that before you call the police on your landlord again." Beverly let out an incoherent shriek of frustration. She realized she had zero leverage, zero power, and zero money. She spun around on her heel, marching toward the elevator, hitting the call button with frantic, angry strikes. The doors opened and she stormed inside, refusing to look back as the metal panels slid shut, taking her toxic presence out of my sanctuary. The two police officers stood in the foyer, looking deeply uncomfortable. The taller one handed the certified ledgers back to Donovan. "Ms. Reed," the officer said, turning to me with a highly apologetic expression, "we are incredibly sorry for the intrusion. We have to follow up on these calls, especially when they allege elder abuse. But the evidence is clear. This is a civil matter, though it barely even qualifies as that since the funds are clearly yours." "I understand," I replied, offering a polite nod. "You were just doing your jobs, but I would appreciate it if a note was made in the system regarding my mother's false allegations, just in case she tries to escalate this further." "Consider it done," the second officer said. "We will document that the complainant fabricated the financial claims. Have a good evening, Ms. Reed. Mr. Pierce." Donovan escorted them to the elevator. Once the doors closed behind the officers, the penthouse returned to its beautiful, pristine silence. Donovan turned to me, a fierce, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Well," he said, loosening his silk tie, "that was exhilarating. But you know this was just their opening move. They are not going to stop here." I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up my wine glass, taking a slow, celebratory sip. "I know they will not stop, Donovan. They are desperate, and desperate people make sloppy mistakes. Let them try whatever they want." I continued, my voice steady and cold. "Because by the time they realize I am not just defending myself, I will have taken everything they claim to own." Donovan opened his briefcase again, pulling out a fresh stack of legal pads. He walked over to my dining table and spread them out. He knew exactly how my mind worked. We had anticipated every possible reaction from the Reed family, and Beverly weaponizing the police was right at the top of our bingo card. So Donovan asked, pulling a silver pen from his pocket. We have successfully neutralized the police threat. What is our next angle of attack? Because Trevor has been making quite a few panicked calls to a PR agency. I smiled, feeling the adrenaline of the victory settling into a sharp, focused strategy. Trevor and Naomi think they can win a war of optics. Let them assemble their little army. We are going to let them dig their own graves on the internet, and when they are deep enough, we will bury them. Donovan was right about their next move. My family, stripped of their financial leverage and legally outmaneuvered, had to pivot. They could not use the police. They could not use the bank. So they decided to weaponize the public against me entirely. My personal cell phone buzzed loudly on the counter. It was an alert from my cybersecurity team, followed immediately by a call from Donovan. I answered on the very first ring. "Are you watching Instagram?" Donovan asked, his voice laced with sharp amusement. "Your sister-in-law just went live. She has the ring light set up and the waterproof mascara. It is quite the production." I opened the application on my tablet and navigated to Naomi's profile. She had 800,000 followers, an audience built by flaunting the luxury lifestyle I secretly funded. As the live video played, I watched the viewer count skyrocket from 10,000 to 50,000 in mere minutes. Naomi sat on the velvet sofa in the mansion she shared with Trevor. She looked directly into the camera, took a trembling breath, and let a single tear roll down her cheek. "Hey guys," Naomi began, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "I did not want to bring this to the internet, but my husband Trevor and I are facing an absolute nightmare. We are being targeted, and I feel so unsafe. Jordan has always hated me." Naomi wept. "I tried so hard to be part of this family, but she never accepted me, and now she is using her wealth to completely destroy our lives. She locked us out of our family business accounts out of pure spite. She is trying to leave us homeless." The comment section began scrolling at lightning speed. Her followers were outraged. Naomi saw the engagement and pushed harder, deploying her ultimate weapon. "I did not want to say this," Naomi sobbed, clutching her chest. "But it is because of who I am. She has always made horrific racist microaggressions toward me. She cannot stand seeing a successful Black woman thriving in her family. And the most sickening part, Trevor and I are trying to start a family. We are trying to have a baby, and Jordan knows this. She timed this financial attack right when we were preparing the nursery. She wants to put her own unborn niece out on the street because of her toxic prejudice." I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. Naomi and Trevor had explicitly told me at Thanksgiving they never wanted children because it would ruin their travel aesthetic. The nursery she mentioned was actually a customized closet for her designer shoes. Furthermore, the racism accusation was a brilliant, malicious strike. In today's climate, dropping that accusation was a guaranteed way to summon a digital lynch mob. She was wrapping her sheer greed in the impenetrable armor of social justice. The viewer count broke 100,000. The chat was a blur of absolute fury. Naomi's followers were demanding my name, demanding my workplace, demanding blood. "They are coming for you, Jordan." Naomi wept into the camera, speaking directly to me now. "You thought you could silence us with your corporate lawyers. But you cannot silence the truth. I will not let your racism and your jealousy destroy my family." She ended the broadcast. The screen went black, but the digital shockwave had already detonated. Within a single hour, the video was clipped and reposted across every major social media platform. Hashtags demanding justice for Naomi began trending. Influencers who had never met me were making reaction videos analyzing her fake tears and condemning my supposed bigotry. They painted me as a wealthy, vindictive villain, using financial abuse to terrorize a vulnerable minority woman. By noon, the internet detectives had done their work. They found my LinkedIn profile, they found my corporate registration, and worst of all, they found Vanguard Analytics. The mob did not care about facts, audited financial records, or the reality of my family's parasitism. They only cared about the emotional narrative Naomi had so expertly spun. They wanted to see the evil corporate sister taken down completely. Within minutes, activists were organizing targeted email campaigns directed at my biggest investors. Anonymous accounts started publishing the addresses of our regional server facilities, encouraging protesters to gather outside our doors. It was a highly coordinated, devastatingly efficient digital assassination attempt. Naomi knew exactly how to manipulate her audience, turning normal people into mindless soldiers, fighting her greedy, selfish war against me and my entire life work. My phone rang again. It was the head of my public relations department. "Jordan, we have a massive crisis," the PR director said, frantically. "Two of our mid-level software clients just called to pause their contracts. They saw the trending video. They said they cannot be associated with a company whose CEO is facing these kinds of public allegations. We need to issue an apology. We need to release a statement saying you are stepping back. If we do not stop this bleeding, Vanguard Analytics is going to lose millions by the end of the week." The sky was clear, but a massive storm was raging around my company. Naomi and Trevor thought they had me cornered. They thought the threat of public ruin would force me to unlock the bank accounts and surrender my wealth just to make the nightmare stop. They thought they had finally found the weapon that could break me. I smiled, the reflection of my face in the glass looking terrifying. "Do not issue an apology." I told the PR director, my voice like ice. "Do not release a statement. Do not respond to a single comment, email, or phone call. Turn off the comment sections on our corporate pages and route all incoming calls to an automated voicemail." But Jordan, the director, pleaded. "The clients, the brand image, we are being slaughtered out there." "Let them slaughter the image," I replied. "Let Naomi have her moment in the sun. Let her bask in the viral glory. She is building a massive platform based entirely on verifiable lies. She just committed digital perjury and dragged her sponsors right down into the mud alongside her." I hung up the phone and calmly walked back to my mahogany desk. The online smear campaign was incredibly brutal, but it was exactly what I needed to spring my trap. Naomi had just handed me the heavy legal rope on a solid silver platter. Now I was going to sit back and watch her tie her own tight knot. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Vanguard Analytics boardroom, but the atmosphere inside was pitch black. My executive team sat around the long glass table looking like they were attending a funeral. At the head of the table, I remained perfectly still, watching the massive digital displays mounted on the wall. The screens showed real-time metrics of the social media storm Naomi had unleashed. The numbers were climbing at a terrifying rate. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. A digital wildfire fueled by carefully manufactured outrage. My public relations director, a sharp professional named David, stood at the front of the room, his tie loosened and his forehead gleaming with sweat. He slid a crisp white folder across the glass table toward me. "Jordan." David pleaded, his voice tight with panic. "This is a drafted apology. It is carefully worded. It acknowledges the pain your sister-in-law expressed without legally admitting to any financial misconduct or discriminatory behavior. We just need you to read it on camera. We can post it across all corporate channels within the hour. If we do not throw water on this fire, the boycotts are going to spread to our enterprise clients. We have already had 3 mid-level accounts threaten to suspend their contracts pending an internal investigation." My chief operating officer, a pragmatic man named Thomas, nodded vigorously in agreement. He tapped his pen against his notepad. "The optics are an absolute disaster, Jordan." She played the victim card flawlessly. "The public thinks you are a ruthless, prejudiced billionaire trying to evict a vulnerable woman. We are bleeding public goodwill. You have to say something. You have to defend yourself before this gets worse." I looked down at the white folder containing the drafted apology. It represented everything my family expected me to do. Apologize, shrink, beg for forgiveness to keep the peace. I reached out, picked up the folder, and calmly dropped it directly into the shredder sitting next to my desk. The machine whirred to life, grinding the carefully crafted apology into worthless paper ribbons. David gasped, stepping back as if I had just set the room on fire. "We are not releasing a statement," I said, my voice echoing in the stunned silence of the boardroom. "We are not apologizing. We are not defending ourselves on the internet. We are going to maintain absolute total silence." But Jordan Thomas argued, leaning forward. "Silence looks exactly like guilt. They are going to crucify Vanguard Analytics." "Let them," I replied, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. "Let the internet scream. Let Naomi bask in her viral fame. She thinks this is a high school popularity contest. She thinks whoever cries the loudest wins. But this is not high school, gentlemen. This is a corporate war, and Naomi just handed me the precise coordinates to her entire supply line." I walked over to the digital display and turned off the social media metrics, replacing them with a blank black screen. "Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake," I told my executive team, locking eyes with David. "Naomi is lying to a massive audience, and she is monetizing those lies. She is building her entire influencer empire on a foundation of verifiable fraud. If I argue with her online, it becomes a he said she said drama. But if I let her dig her own grave, I can bury her in it legally and financially." "Return to your desks. Route all press inquiries to a silent voicemail." The executives filed out of the boardroom, their faces pale with anxiety, but they followed my orders. Once the room was empty, the side door opened and Donovan Pierce strolled in. He had been listening to the entire exchange from the adjoining private office. He tossed his leather briefcase onto the glass table and offered a wicked approving grin. "That was a masterclass in executive restraint," Donovan said, taking a seat. "Your public relations team is terrified, but they do not see the larger board." "Show me the board, Donovan," I commanded, sitting back down across from him. "Show me exactly how Naomi funds her little luxury lifestyle now that she cannot steal from my personal accounts." Donovan opened his briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver tablet. He slid it across the table. "Naomi portrays herself as an independent luxury lifestyle blogger, but she is actually managed by a boutique public relations and talent agency called Apex Influence. They broker all her brand deals, negotiate her sponsorships, and secure those free luxury hotel stays she loves to flaunt. They take a 30% cut of her revenue." I swiped through the digital files on the tablet. "So Apex Influence is the engine keeping her relevant." "Exactly." Donovan confirmed, tapping the screen. "But here's the beautiful part. Apex Influence is currently severely over-leveraged. They expanded too quickly last year and took on massive corporate debt to secure office space in Manhattan. They owe roughly $4 million to a private equity firm, and they have missed their last 2 quarterly payments. They are drowning, Jordan. They are one aggressively collected invoice away from total bankruptcy." I looked at the financial data, the puzzle pieces clicking together with devastating precision. Naomi thought her power came from her followers. She thought her influence was her shield. But her influence was just a product, and the factory producing that product was heavily in debt. "Buy it," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Donovan raised an eyebrow, a predatory glint in his eye. "Buy the agency." "No," I corrected him, sliding the tablet back across the table. "Do not buy the agency. Buy the debt. Use one of our anonymous holding companies. I want Vanguard Analytics to purchase the $4 million debt that Apex Influence owes. I want to own the paper on their entire business." Donovan chuckled, jotting down notes on his legal pad. "If we buy their debt, we become their primary creditor. We will hold the leash to the entire agency, and by extension, we hold the leash to Naomi." I finished, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the glass table. Right now, Naomi is using her management agency to secure new brand deals, capitalizing on this viral fame. She thinks she is untouchable. But when the time is right, when she is at the absolute peak of her arrogant little smear campaign, I am going to call in that $4 million debt. Apex Influence will have to do exactly what I say to avoid bankruptcy. "And what will you say?" Donovan asked, though his smile indicated he already knew the answer. "I will tell them to drop her," I said, feeling the cold, precise satisfaction of a perfectly laid trap. "I will force them to terminate Naomi's management contract, cancel every single one of her brand deals, and blacklist her from their network. I will not fight her in the comment section, Donovan. I am going to completely obliterate her actual revenue stream." Donovan closed his notebook and snapped his briefcase shut. "Consider the debt purchased, Jordan. The transaction will be quietly completed through the holding company by tomorrow morning. Naomi will not have the slightest clue that the sister-in-law she is currently trashing on the internet just became the ultimate owner of her entire career." I stood up and looked out the window at the sprawling city below. My family thought they were playing chess, but they did not even know what board we were on. They thought they could shame me into submission. They thought the threat of public ruin would make me open my wallet and apologize for protecting my own assets. But they were about to learn a very harsh, very permanent lesson about what happens when you try to blackmail the person who silently owns the ground you walk on. The financial trap was perfectly set. The jaws were open. Right now, all I had to do was wait for Naomi to take one more arrogant step. While Naomi was busy staging her digital martyrdom, Trevor was experiencing a very different kind of reality check. The illusion of his billionaire startup lifestyle was evaporating with terrifying speed. Without my anonymous corporate shell company injecting capital into his accounts, the walls were closing in on him. His luxury sports car was scheduled for repossession. The mortgage on his sprawling suburban estate was heavily past due. He had no real investors, no actual business acumen, and absolutely zero cash flow. For a man whose entire identity was built on projecting wealth, the sudden lack of funds was a fate worse than death. Trevor was desperate. He paced the hardwood floors of his mansion, ignoring the frantic calls from his country club demanding their monthly dues. Naomi had locked herself in her custom closet, screaming about her ruined brand deals and demanding that Trevor fix the situation immediately. She expected him to play the powerful husband and force me to reopen the family trust. But Trevor knew he had no leverage. He knew he could not bully me anymore. He needed a massive infusion of cash, and he needed it right now. Driven by pure panic, Trevor drove his soon-to-be repossessed car to our parents' house. He hoped that Harrison might have some hidden reserves, some secret offshore account that could bail them both out. But when Trevor arrived at the massive estate, he found a scene of equal devastation. Harrison was locked in his study, red-faced and hyperventilating over a stack of financial documents. The logistics company was drowning. The banks were closing in. Without my monthly $250,000 injection, Harrison was facing a catastrophic margin call. They were all going down together. Trevor left his father tearing at his hair and wandered the silent, tense halls of the house. He was looking for a miracle. He was looking for anything of value that he could liquidate to buy himself just a few more days of relevance. His wandering eventually brought him to the end of the second-floor corridor. He stopped in front of a simple white door. It was my old childhood bedroom. My parents had rarely entered that room since I moved out. They had preserved it not out of love or nostalgia, but out of sheer indifference. It was a storage space for a daughter they considered a disappointment. Trevor turned the brass knob and pushed the door open. The air inside was stale. The room was sparse, containing only a basic bed, a wooden desk, and a few dusty bookshelves. It was a stark contrast to the lavish suites the rest of the family occupied. Trevor began pulling open drawers, searching for old jewelry, savings bonds, or forgotten cash. He was acting like a common thief in his own home. He ripped through my old notebooks, tossing my high school debate medals onto the floor. Finding nothing of immediate financial value, he moved to the bottom drawer of the heavy oak desk. It was jammed shut. He yanked it hard, the wood splintering slightly as it finally gave way. Inside, buried beneath a stack of old graphic design textbooks, sat a heavy silver external hard drive. It was an older model, thick and outdated. Trevor picked it up, weighing it in his hands. He knew I had been obsessed with coding during my college years, before I allegedly dropped out. He knew I spent thousands of hours locked in this room, furiously typing lines of data before my parents kicked me to the curb. Curiosity overriding his panic, Trevor grabbed the drive and hurried down to his father's study. He completely ignored Harrison, who was currently yelling at a loan officer on the phone, and plugged the silver drive directly into a laptop sitting on the side table. The computer chimed, recognizing the external device. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was simply labeled Genesis. Trevor clicked it open. His eyes widened as line after line of complex proprietary source code flooded the screen. He was not a successful software engineer, but he had spent enough time pretending to be a tech founder to recognize what he was looking at. This was not a college project. This was a sophisticated, highly advanced predictive algorithm. It was the raw foundational architecture that processed massive datasets to predict market trends. It was the exact algorithm that served as the beating heart of Vanguard Analytics. I had left that backup drive hidden in the desk 5 years ago, long before Vanguard became an industry titan. It contained the blueprints to my entire empire. And now my desperate, greedy brother was staring right at it. Trevor did not see a breach of privacy. He did not see a felony. He saw a winning lottery ticket. A greedy, manic smile spread across his face. He knew exactly how much this code was worth to the right buyer. If Vanguard Analytics was dominating the financial technology sector with this algorithm, their competitors would pay a fortune to get their hands on the source code. It was the ultimate shortcut. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He bypassed his contacts and pulled up the directory for Apex Solutions. Apex was the second largest financial data firm in the country. They were my biggest rival, and they had been losing market share to Vanguard for 3 consecutive quarters. They were hungry, aggressive, and perfectly positioned to exploit a stolen asset. Trevor dialed the direct line for the Apex executive acquisition team. The phone rang twice before a polished voice answered. Trevor did not waste time with pleasantries. He paced the floor of the study, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My name is Trevor Reed," he told the executive. "I have something your engineering team is going to want to see. It is the foundational source code for the Vanguard predictive algorithm, the exact architecture Jordan Reed uses to run her company. I have the entire raw file unencrypted and ready for transfer." The line went dead quiet for a moment. The Apex executive knew exactly how explosive this offer was. Corporate espionage at this level was highly illegal, but it was also incredibly lucrative. If they could reverse engineer my algorithm, they could level the playing field overnight. "What is your asking price?" the executive finally asked, his tone shifting from professional to predatory. Trevor looked at his father, who had just slammed the phone down in despair. He calculated his debts, his failing lifestyle, and the looming collapse of the family logistics company. He needed to be the savior. He needed to walk away wealthy. $3 million, Trevor demanded, his voice thick with arrogance. $3 million in a direct wire transfer by the end of the week. You get the drive and Vanguard loses its monopoly. Do we have a deal? The trap was set, but Trevor was the one stepping right into it. The moment Trevor connected that obsolete silver hard drive to his father's laptop, an invisible alarm triggered precisely 300 miles away. In the subterranean levels of the Vanguard Analytics headquarters, a dedicated server rack designated solely for honeypot operations lit up with a sequence of flashing red indicators. I was sitting in my top-floor executive suite, reviewing the acquisition contracts for the public relations firm, handling Naomi's crumbling influencer empire, when my secure internal line buzzed. It was Elias, my chief of cybersecurity. His voice carried the sharp, disciplined edge of a former military intelligence officer who rarely encountered a breach he had not personally anticipated. "Jordan, we have a live ping on the Genesis decoy," Elias reported over the encrypted channel. "The security shell was bypassed using the rudimentary brute force method we expected. Someone just accessed the localized files." I leaned forward, a slow, predatory smile touching my lips. I had left that specific drive in my childhood desk 5 years ago with a very distinct purpose. It was a digital mousetrap. The code housed inside was completely authentic, a functional version of the early predictive algorithm that served as the foundation of my entire company. But it was also laced with a military-grade tracking beacon. The moment it connected to an external network, it began broadcasting its exact location, IP address, and every keystroke executed by the user. "Are we picking up the geolocation?" I asked, turning my chair to face the massive digital monitors mounted on my office wall. Elias typed rapidly for a few seconds, the sound echoing through the speaker. "The coordinates are confirmed. The ping is originating from the residential network at your parents' estate. Specifically, it is routing through a laptop registered to Harrison Reed. The user is currently copying the raw files to a temporary desktop folder." "My brother always was incredibly predictable," I murmured, watching a map of the city appear on my primary monitor, a pulsing red dot highlighting the suburban mansion I had once called a prison. "Keep the connection open, Elias. Do not block the transfer. Let him take exactly what he thinks he needs. Monitor all outbound communications from that network and patch Donovan Pierce through to my office immediately." Less than 2 minutes later, Donovan strode through my double doors. He bypassed the guest chairs and moved directly to the screen displaying the active cyber breach. He adjusted his suit jacket, his eyes narrowing as he read the live data logs cascading down the monitor. "Trevor actually took the bait," Donovan said, his voice a mix of disbelief and dark amusement. "Your brother is currently downloading stolen proprietary software on your father's internet connection. That is incredibly stupid even for him. He is leaving a digital footprint the size of a crater." "He is desperate, Donovan," I replied, standing up to join him at the screen. "Desperate people do not care about footprints. They only care about survival. Look at the outbound traffic logs. He is not just stealing it, he is shopping it." Elias patched the active network analysis onto the main display. We watched in real time as Trevor initiated a secure communication channel. He was not contacting a dark web forum or an anonymous broker. He was calling the corporate acquisition hotline for Apex Solutions. Donovan stiffened, his lawyer instincts instantly flaring. "Apex Solutions. They are your largest competitor. If they get their hands on that foundational code, they could reverse engineer your entire market strategy. They have the capital to rush a rival product to launch in less than 6 months. Jordan, we need to shut this down right now." Donovan pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over his contacts. "I am calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have him dead to rights on corporate theft. The cyber division can have agents at your parents' house in 20 minutes. We seize the drive, we arrest Trevor, and we file an immediate injunction against Apex Solutions to prevent them from reviewing any transferred data." I reached out and placed my hand firmly over his phone, pushing it down. "No," I commanded, my voice carrying absolute chilling authority. Donovan looked at me, genuinely shocked. "Jordan, you cannot let him sell that code. It is the architectural blueprint of Vanguard Analytics. If Apex validates that software, it could cost you billions in market share. Let him sell it," I repeated, stepping back and clasping my hands behind my back. "We are not calling the authorities to stop a simple theft. If we arrest him now, he gets charged with breaking and entering, maybe petty corporate larceny. He hires a decent defense attorney, plays the victim, and gets off with probation and community service. That is not enough. I do not just want him stopped. I want him legally destroyed." Donovan slowly lowered his phone, the realization of my strategy beginning to dawn on his face. "Explain," he said softly. "If Trevor simply steals the drive, it is a domestic dispute over family property," I explained, pacing the length of the boardroom table. "But if he negotiates a sale with a rival corporation, signs a transfer agreement, and accepts a wire payment across state lines for proprietary corporate assets that do not belong to him, the game changes entirely. That elevates his pathetic little heist into federal wire fraud, interstate commerce violations, and grand corporate espionage." The mandatory minimum sentencing for those federal charges is astronomical, Donovan murmured, a wicked smile slowly replacing his earlier panic. He would be looking at 10 to 20 years in federal prison. Exactly, I confirmed, turning back to the screen. Trevor thinks he is selling a stolen television. He does not understand he is trafficking in restricted corporate intellectual property. I want him to sign that contract with Apex. I want him to accept their $3 million. I want the money to hit his bank account. Donovan crossed his arms, staring at the flashing red dot on the map. And what about Apex Solutions? If they acquire the code, they become a massive liability to Vanguard. I laughed, a sharp, cold sound that echoed against the glass walls of my suite. Apex Solutions is not a liability, Donovan. They are my next acquisition target. They have been hemorrhaging cash for 2 quarters. While Trevor is busy negotiating his little treasonous deal, I want you to initiate a hostile takeover. Use the proxy firms. Buy up every available share of Apex stock. By the time Trevor finalizes his sale, Vanguard Analytics will be the majority shareholder of Apex Solutions. He will effectively be selling stolen goods back to the person he stole them from. We will trap him in a federal crime, and we will own the company stupid enough to buy his stolen merchandise. Let him dig the grave. We will provide the shovel. Donovan did not waste a single second. He immediately mobilized our acquisitions team, locking them in a secure conference room with strict non-disclosure agreements. They operated through a labyrinth of offshore holding companies and blind trusts entities that could never be directly traced back to Vanguard Analytics or my name. Apex Solutions was already a wounded animal. They had missed their quarterly projections by a massive margin, and their stock price was bleeding out on the open market. It was the perfect time for a silent slaughter. We began buying up blocks of their publicly traded shares, sweeping up the equity in aggressive but carefully staggered waves to avoid triggering any automatic market alarms. While Donovan orchestrated the financial takeover, Elias kept our surveillance fixed on the pulsing red dot that represented my brother. The digital tracking software I had embedded in that old hard drive was feeding us a live broadcast of his impending doom. We watched every keystroke Trevor made. I sat at my desk, sipping a fresh espresso, watching the monitors as he opened an encrypted email from the executive acquisition team at Apex Solutions. They were moving with reckless speed, desperate to get their hands on a predictive algorithm that could save their sinking company. They sent Trevor a non-disclosure agreement and a digital contract for the transfer of proprietary intellectual property. Trevor did not even hire a lawyer to read the terms. His arrogance was matched only by his profound ignorance. He believed he was executing a brilliant high-level corporate maneuver. In reality, he was blindly signing a confession to federal crimes. The digital pen strokes appeared on my screen in real time. Trevor Reed, the fake startup founder, officially sold stolen corporate architecture. The moment his signature populated on the final page, Apex Solutions authorized the payment. A wire transfer of $3 million was initiated. We tracked the digital funds as they left the Apex corporate accounts, surged across state lines, and landed directly into Trevor's personal bank account. It was a textbook violation of the Interstate Commerce Act. He had trafficked stolen intellectual property across federal jurisdictions for a multi-million-dollar payout. But Trevor was not keeping the money. He was playing the loyal, heroic son. Less than 10 minutes after the funds cleared, another massive wire transfer was initiated. Trevor routed the entire $3 million directly into the primary operating account of Harrison's failing logistics company. He transferred the capital with a note that simply read, "Family comes first." I could vividly picture the scene unfolding at my parents' estate. Harrison probably had tears of joy in his eyes, clapping his golden boy on the shoulder, praising him as the savior of the Reed family legacy. Naomi was undoubtedly celebrating, dreaming of new designer bags and luxury vacations, convinced that her husband was a financial genius who had just outsmarted his bitter, useless sister. They thought they had won. They thought they had secured their future using the very asset they believed I had carelessly abandoned. They had no idea they were celebrating inside a burning building. My office door swung open, and Donovan walked in. He looked exhausted, but practically vibrated with triumphant energy. He walked straight to the center of my desk and dropped a single sheet of paper onto the polished mahogany surface. It was a confirmation of execution from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We crossed the threshold. Donovan announced, his voice carrying the heavy weight of total victory. The proxy acquisitions are complete. Through our subsidiaries, Vanguard Analytics now holds exactly 51.4% of the voting shares in Apex Solutions. You are officially the majority shareholder. You own the board. You own the company. I picked up the document, scanning the beautiful concrete numbers. The timing was absolutely poetic. I looked up at the digital monitor. The timestamp on Trevor's $3 million wire transfer perfectly aligned with the timestamp of our final stock acquisition. Do you understand what he just did? I asked, a cold thrill running through my veins. Donovan leaned against the glass wall, crossing his arms with a predatory grin. I understand perfectly. Trevor stole a highly classified proprietary algorithm from the CEO of Vanguard Analytics. He then sold that stolen algorithm for $3 million to a rival tech firm. But because you just acquired that rival tech firm, the $3 million they used to pay him was technically your money. I stood up and walked over to the monitor, staring at the digital trace of my brother's crime. He stole my property, and he sold it back to me using my own money, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And he left a federal paper trail so thick a first-year law student could get him a 20-year prison sentence. It is the most beautifully documented case of wire fraud and corporate espionage I have ever seen in my entire career, Donovan agreed. The FBI Cyber Division will not even have to investigate. We can hand them the entire prosecution on a silver platter. Should I make the call to the federal prosecutor now? I turned away from the screen and looked out over the city. The urge to crush them immediately was strong, a heavy, intoxicating temptation. But I remembered the margin call Harrison was facing. $3 million was a massive amount of money to an ordinary person, but it was a drop in the ocean compared to the catastrophic debt my father had accumulated. His bank was demanding $15 million. Trevor's stolen money was just a temporary bandage on a fatal wound. Not yet, I instructed Donovan. If we arrest him today, they can still play the victim card. Harrison will claim he did not know the money was stolen. Naomi will cry on the internet that I set her husband up. I want them to feel the absolute peak of their false security. I want them to dress up, look the world in the eye, and declare their triumph right before we pull the floor out from under them. Donovan nodded slowly, recognizing the depth of my strategy. Harrison is hosting that massive corporate anniversary gala this weekend. He invited every major player in the city, trying to lure an angel investor to cover the rest of his margin call. I walked back to my desk and picked up the gold-embossed invitation my mother had sent me. Exactly, I said, tossing the heavy cardstock into the trash can. We let them host their little party. We let them celebrate their stolen money. And then we bring the entire empire down on their heads. Prepare the federal indictments, Donovan. We are going to a gala. The corporate trap had snapped shut with lethal precision. My family had spent their entire lives treating me like a stepping stone, a disposable asset they could use and discard at their convenience. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my boundaries were a temporary tantrum. They were about to learn that when you push a self-made millionaire into a corner, you do not get an apology. You get a masterclass in total, absolute annihilation. Trevor's $3 million wire transfer hit the logistics corporate account with a digital chime that Harrison Reed probably thought sounded like salvation. He was entirely wrong. It was nothing more than a brief gasp of air for a drowning man. The financial rot inside his logistics empire was systemic and terminal. For years, I had been the invisible dam holding back a massive reservoir of debt. The moment I pulled my funds, that dam shattered, and the sheer volume of his fiscal negligence came rushing in to drown him. Less than 12 hours after Trevor committed federal wire fraud to save his father, the corporate banking division of Harrison's primary lender initiated a comprehensive portfolio review. The automated systems detected the sudden halt of my regular $250,000 injections. The algorithms flagged the logistics company as a critical liability. The bank did not care about Trevor's stolen $3 million. They cared about the massive unsecured loans Harrison had been floating on the assumption that my anonymous trust would cover the interest forever. The phone call came directly from the vice president of corporate lending. I received the transcript of this interaction later through Donovan's legal channels, and it painted a picture of absolute humiliation. The bank issued an immediate non-negotiable margin call. Harrison was ordered to produce $15 million in liquid capital within 48 hours. If the funds were not wired by the deadline, the bank would execute their default clauses. They would seize his entire commercial trucking fleet, freeze all operational assets, and foreclose on the suburban mansion he and Beverly used as their primary collateral. Harrison was backed against a wall of his own making. The panic in my parents' house must have been suffocating. Beverly could not fathom losing her status. The idea of being evicted from her estate and forced to live in a standard apartment was a fate worse than death for a woman whose entire identity was built on country club prestige. They needed a miracle, and since they had already burned their bridges with me, they resorted to the only strategy they knew. They decided to put on a show. If the ship is sinking, Beverly apparently reasoned, you do not abandon it. You throw a party on the upper deck and convince a wealthy passenger to buy the vessel. Harrison and Beverly decided to proceed with the 35th anniversary gala for the logistics company. It was a spectacular display of delusional arrogance. To fund this charade, they drained the absolute last of their hidden high-interest credit lines. They mortgaged the remaining equity on their luxury vehicles and took out predatory personal loans just to secure the grand ballroom at a 5-star downtown hotel. They ordered imported champagne, exotic floral arrangements, and hired a string quartet. They were spending money they did not have to project an image of invulnerability to the city elite. Their goal was incredibly specific. The gala was not a celebration. It was a desperate gilded trap designed for one specific target. They were trying to woo an elusive billionaire angel investor named Preston Caldwell. Preston Caldwell was a legend in the corporate sector. He was known for swooping into distressed legacy companies, injecting massive amounts of capital, and turning them around for a profit. Harrison had been trying to get a meeting with Caldwell for months without success. By hosting a lavish, high-profile gala, Harrison believed he could corner Caldwell in a social setting, present the logistics company as a thriving, expanding enterprise, and secure a $10 million emergency investment before the bank deadline expired. It was the ultimate Hail Mary pass from a desperate quarterback. From the safety of my penthouse, Donovan and I monitored their frantic preparations. My private intelligence team had tapped into the vendor contracts for the gala. We knew exactly how much caviar they ordered, which photographers they hired, and the precise seating chart for the VIP tables. They placed Preston Caldwell at the head table directly next to Naomi, and Trevor Donovan, noted reviewing the intelligence dossier on my glass desk. They are going to use Naomi's influencer persona and Trevor's fake tech founder status to convince Caldwell that the Reed family is a dynasty of successful entrepreneurs. They are going to pitch him the illusion of a perfect, highly profitable American family. I picked up my coffee cup, feeling a cold, razor-sharp focus settling over me. They are throwing a masquerade ball to hide a bankruptcy, I said. They think if they dress up in rented tuxedos and flash Trevor's stolen money, they can charm their way out of a $15 million margin call. They honestly believe they can lie to a billionaire the same way they lied to their country club friends. Donovan smirked, adjusting his suit jacket. Caldwell is not a fool, Jordan. He will want to see their financials before he signs a single check. But if Harrison can fake a good enough pitch, he might buy himself an extension with the bank. He might use Caldwell's verbal interest as leverage to delay the asset seizure. That is why we cannot let him make the pitch, I replied, standing up and walking toward the panoramic window. We are going to attend this gala, Donovan. I want front row seats to the exact moment my parents realize their ship has hit the iceberg. I instructed my assistant to contact my personal stylist. If Beverly and Naomi wanted to play a game of optics and wealth, I was going to show them what actual self-made power looked like. I was not going to show up in the drab, oversized sweaters my mother used to force me to wear to hide my confidence. I was outfitting myself for a corporate execution. The deadline for the margin call coincided perfectly with the night of the gala. Harrison had precisely 48 hours to save his mansion, his fleet, and his pride. He thought Preston Caldwell was his golden ticket. He had no idea that the billionaire he was desperately trying to impress was not the predator in the room. I was. And I was bringing the entire force of Vanguard Analytics down upon his fragile, crumbling kingdom. Naomi was already posting teaser videos on her social media, showing off the designer gown she had bought with Trevor's stolen funds, hyping up the gala as the business event of the decade. She had no idea her public relations agency was now owned by me. She had no idea her husband was facing federal indictment. She was just dancing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded by her own vanity. The stage was set for a public massacre. The morning after my decision to attend the gala, a bonded courier arrived at the Vanguard Analytics reception desk. My executive assistant brought the package up to my suite, handling the thick midnight blue envelope as if it contained a live explosive. She placed it squarely in the center of my mahogany desk and stepped back. I slid a silver letter opener under the wax seal. The seal was stamped with the Reed family crest, a ridiculous, pretentious emblem my father had commissioned a designer to invent 5 years ago, to make his logistics company seem like a generational dynasty. Inside was a piece of heavy gold embossed cardstock. It was a formal invitation to the 35th anniversary gala of Reed Logistics. My name, Jordan Reed, was written in flawless calligraphy across the top. At the exact moment I pulled the card from its envelope, my private cell phone chimed. The caller ID displayed my mother's number. She did not call, she simply left a direct voicemail, likely knowing I would not answer. I tapped the screen and put the audio on speaker just as Donovan Pierce walked into my office. Jordan, my sweet girl. Beverly's voice drifted out of the phone, dripping with a sugary, manufactured warmth that made my skin crawl. Her tone was so artificially gentle, you would completely forget she had recently brought armed police officers to my home and called me an ungrateful parasite. I know things have been incredibly tense lately, Beverly cooed through the speaker. Emotions ran high, and we all said things we regret. But at the end of the day, we are family. Blood is thicker than water, sweetheart. Your father and I miss you terribly. We are hosting the company anniversary gala this weekend, and it simply would not be a celebration without our brilliant daughter there. Please come, Jordan. Let us put this silly misunderstanding behind us and heal. We have a special table reserved just for you. I love you. The voicemail ended with a soft click. The silence in my executive suite was heavy, broken only by Donovan's dry, cynical laughter. A silly misunderstanding, Donovan repeated, walking over to pour himself a cup of coffee. Your brother committed federal wire fraud by selling stolen corporate property. Your sister-in-law launched a digital smear campaign that attempted to destroy your business. Your mother filed a false police report to extort you. And they are classifying all of this as a silly misunderstanding. The psychological detachment from reality is genuinely fascinating. They do not want a family reconciliation, I said, tossing the gold-embossed invitation onto the glass coffee table. They want a hostage. What did your investigators find, Donovan? Because Beverly does not apologize unless there is a knife hidden behind her back. Donovan set his coffee down and opened his briefcase. When I told you I had my intelligence team looking into your father's margin call, I did not just stop at his banking records. I had them pull the communications from the shady corporate attorney Harrison keeps on retainer. Your parents are not just trying to save their mansion, Jordan. They are planning an execution. He slid a thick blue legal folder across my desk. I opened it and began scanning the documents inside. It was a draft of a corporate contract. Specifically, it was an asset absorption agreement. I read the legal jargon, my blood running colder with every sentence. According to this document, Vanguard Analytics would instantly be reclassified as a subsidiary holding of the Reed Logistics corporate umbrella. It required the immediate transfer of all liquid assets, intellectual property, and executive voting rights directly to Harrison. "They want to steal my company," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "They actually printed a contract to steal my entire life work." "Look at the strategy," Donovan pointed out, tapping the edge of the contract. "Harrison is backed into a corner with a $15 million margin call. He needs Preston Caldwell, the billionaire angel investor, to bail him out. But Caldwell will not invest in a sinking ship. So Harrison plans to present Vanguard Analytics as his own secret asset. He is going to tell Caldwell that your highly profitable financial technology firm is actually part of the Reed family portfolio." I leaned back in my chair, visualizing the layout of the gala ballroom. "And how exactly do they plan to force me to sign this corporate suicide note?" "That is where Naomi and the public pressure come in." Donovan explained, his eyes locking onto mine. "The gala is packed with the city elite. Naomi has invited several high-profile media outlets to cover the event, ostensibly to promote her influencer brand. Their plan is to corner you in the VIP lounge right before the main presentation. Harrison will introduce you to Preston Caldwell. Then, with the billionaire watching and the media hovering just outside the doors, they will slide this contract across the table." I understood perfectly. If I sign it, Harrison gets to show Caldwell a massive thriving asset, securing his $10 million bailout. Trevor gets his stolen money legitimized, and Naomi gets her unlimited credit cards turned back on. And if I refuse to sign, I asked, though I already knew the answer. "If you refuse," Naomi threatens to take the microphone and escalate her smear campaign directly to the attending press. Donovan said, his expression grim. "She will claim you are abandoning your elderly parents to bankruptcy out of pure racial prejudice and spite. Harrison will publicly disown you in front of the most powerful investors in the state, effectively blacklisting Vanguard Analytics from any future local corporate partnerships. They are using the gala as a public guillotine. Sign the company over or face total public unrecoverable humiliation." It was a brilliant, malicious trap. It relied entirely on the assumption that I was still the terrified, compliant daughter who would break under the weight of public scrutiny. They thought the presence of a billionaire like Preston Caldwell would intimidate me into submission. They thought I would surrender my empire just to avoid a scene in front of the city elite. They severely miscalculated. "Donovan," I said, closing the blue folder and resting my hands flat on my desk, "I want you to RSVP to this invitation. Tell my mother I would be absolutely honored to attend their beautiful family reconciliation." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "You are walking right into the ambush." "I am not walking into an ambush," I corrected him, picking up my silver letter opener and turning it over in my hands. "I am walking into an execution. They want to use Preston Caldwell as leverage to steal my company. But they do not realize that Preston Caldwell is not their savior. He is my employee." I stood up, the adrenaline of the impending battle making my senses razor sharp. They want to play corporate hardball in front of the cameras. We are going to give them a show they will never forget. "Get my tailored suit ready, Donovan. We are going to accept their fake olive branch, and we are going to beat them to death with it." Clicking the digital RSVP provided immeasurable satisfaction. I confirmed my attendance for the Reed Logistics Anniversary Gala, adding a standardized note expressing gratitude for the invitation. I imagined my mother Beverly receiving the notification in her heavily mortgaged mansion, sipping a mimosa, congratulating herself on her masterful manipulation. She honestly believed her sugary voicemail had reeled me right back into the family enclosure. She thought she was holding the leash, completely unaware I had already bought the entire kennel. Thursday and Friday were dedicated to crafting the execution. My Vanguard Analytics boardroom transformed into a legal war room. Donovan Pierce practically lived at the glass conference table, flanked by 3 junior partners, bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements. We were not preparing for a negotiation. We were assembling an arsenal. By Friday evening, 3 black leather folders sat precisely aligned in the center of my desk. They were heavy loaded with irrefutable catastrophic documentation that ruins dynasties. I touched the textured leather of the first folder, which belonged to Trevor. Inside lay the executed records proving Vanguard Analytics owned Apex Solutions. Attached were the digital tracking logs signed intellectual property transfer contracts and federal banking receipts showing Trevor moving $3 million of stolen corporate funds across state lines. Donovan had liaised with his contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Cyber Division had prepared a sealed indictment. The trap was inescapable. The second folder was the financial guillotine for my father Harrison. It contained the formal debt acquisition portfolio. Through an anonymous holding company, Vanguard Analytics had quietly purchased the $15 million margin call debt from his primary lender, along with the underlying mortgage on his estate. The folder held official foreclosure notices, asset seizure authorizations, and immediate breach of contract terminations for his commercial trucking fleet. Handing him this folder would instantly render him a man, without a company, without a home, and without a single cent. The third folder was reserved entirely for Naomi. It housed corporate debt ownership papers for Apex Influence, the public relations agency managing her fake luxury lifestyle. Alongside the debt ownership was a drafted mandate from Vanguard Analytics, demanding the immediate termination of Naomi Reed from the agency roster. It included the cancellation of every active brand sponsorship and the repossession of all loaned designer merchandise. This folder would strip away her influencer armor and expose the absolute fraud underneath. "Everything is synchronized," Donovan said, stepping into the office. "The asset seizure orders for the logistics company go live at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. The bank will electronically lock your father out of his operational accounts as the gala dinner begins. Plainclothes federal agents will be standing by in the hotel lobby, waiting for our signal to move on Trevor. And Preston Caldwell is fully briefed." I smiled at the mention of Preston. My family thought he was an untouchable billionaire angel investor. They had no idea he was a primary seed investor who helped launch Vanguard Analytics years ago. He sat on my board of directors as a trusted mentor and a loyal ally. When I told him about Harrison's plan to use him as a pawn to steal my company, Preston was disgusted. He gladly agreed to attend the gala and play the bait. The legal architecture was flawless. The financial chokeholds were in place. The only thing left to prepare was the aesthetic. Saturday evening arrived with chilling anticipation. I stood in the mirrored marble dressing room of my penthouse, staring intently at my reflection. For 34 years, my mother had dictated my appearance at family functions. Beverly forced me into drab, oversized clothing. She bought me shapeless beige sweaters, dull gray slacks, and forgettable dresses. Her goal was psychological. She wanted me to be invisible. She needed me to look like the tired background character so Trevor and Naomi could shine brighter by comparison. She used my wardrobe to manifest the failure she wanted me to be. Those days were permanently over. I reached into the protective garment bag hanging in the center of the room and pulled out the custom-tailored suit I had commissioned weeks ago. It was not beige, it was not gray. It was a brilliant, striking, unapologetic crimson red. I slipped into the tailored trousers and buttoned the sharp, structured blazer. The fit was perfection, designed to project power, authority, and lethal confidence. It commanded attention the second you walked through the door. I paired it with a black silk blouse and black stiletto heels that clicked against the hardwood floor like the ticking of a countdown clock. I opted for a clean, sharp look with a bold red lip that matched the suit perfectly. For jewelry, I kept it minimal but devastatingly expensive. I fastened a platinum Cartier watch around my wrist, a subtle mockery of the watch Naomi cried over when her stolen credit card declined. I looked at myself in the mirror. The timid girl who used to shrink in the corner of her parents' living room was entirely gone. The woman staring back at me was a corporate predator, a self-made titan who held the financial lives of her abusers in the palm of her hand. The crimson suit felt like armor. It felt like a warning. Donovan knocked on the dressing room door, stepping inside wearing a black tuxedo that made him look like a corporate hitman. He paused, taking in my appearance, and let out a low, impressed whistle. "They are going to be terrified of you before you even open your mouth," Donovan said, handing me a sleek black leather clutch designed to hold the 3 execution folders. "That is exactly the point," I replied, taking the clutch and turning toward the door. "My mother wanted me to attend this gala to play the victim. I am going to show her exactly what an apex predator looks like." "Let us go to the party, Donovan. It is time to collect our debts." The drive to the downtown Ritz-Carlton took exactly 20 minutes. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of my private car, casting sharp reflections across the leather interior. Donovan sat beside me in perfect silence, his eyes fixed on his phone as he received real-time updates from our intelligence team. The trap was fully armed. All that remained was walking onto the battlefield and pulling the trigger. We pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel. A swarm of valet attendants rushed to open the doors. Flashing cameras illuminated the red carpet leading up the marble steps. Naomi had clearly leaked the event details to every local society blog and desperate freelance photographer she could find. She needed an audience for her victim narrative, and she needed maximum exposure for when my parents executed their planned corporate hostage situation in the VIP lounge. I stepped out of the car, my stiletto heels striking the pavement with absolute authority. The crisp night air hit my face, but I felt completely insulated by the heavy, flawless tailoring of my crimson suit. Donovan fell into step beside me, a silent shadow of legal ruin. We bypassed the flashing cameras and walked directly through the revolving brass doors, stepping into the opulent, suffocating atmosphere of the Reed Logistics 35th Anniversary Gala. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in financial delusion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of guests dressed in their finest evening wear. Waiters in white gloves circulated with silver trays of imported champagne and beluga caviar. Elaborate floral centerpieces of white orchids and hydrangeas towered over the silk-draped tables. It was a breathtaking display of wealth entirely funded by predatory loans and sheer blinding desperation. From my vantage point at the top of the grand staircase, I surveyed the room and instantly spotted my family. They were performing exactly as I anticipated. Harrison stood near the center ice sculpture, aggressively networking with a group of local banking executives. He was laughing too loud, gripping shoulders too tightly, and sweating through the collar of his expensive tuxedo. To the untrained eye, he looked like the jovial patriarch of a thriving empire. But I could see the frantic, terrified energy practically vibrating out of him. His eyes constantly darted toward the entrance, searching for Preston Caldwell, the billionaire savior he desperately needed to appease before the bank seized his entire commercial fleet at midnight. Across the room, Naomi was holding court near a branded step and repeat banner. She was completely in her element, posing for photographers and dramatically clutching her chest while speaking to a group of sympathetic socialites. Around her neck sat a massive, glittering diamond necklace. It caught the light, beautifully projecting the exact image of unbothered luxury she wanted her followers to see. I almost laughed out loud. I knew for an absolute fact that the necklace was a temporary rental secured by Apex Influence, the very public relations agency whose corporate debt I now legally owned. The diamonds resting on her collarbone practically belonged to me, and she was proudly parading them around while trashing my name. Trevor stood dutifully behind his wife, looking arrogant and smug. He was sipping a dark liquor and nodding along to Naomi's performance. He believed the $3 million resting in his father's bank account had secured his position as the ultimate hero. He believed his stolen intellectual property had saved the family legacy. He had no idea that federal agents were currently staging in unmarked vehicles in the hotel parking garage, waiting for my signal. I placed my hand on the polished mahogany railing and began my descent down the grand staircase. Donovan matched my pace perfectly. The moment I reached the ballroom floor, the crimson red of my suit cut through the sea of black tuxedos and muted beige gowns like a warning siren. It took less than 30 seconds for the whispers to begin. The social media smear campaign Naomi had launched was highly effective. The people in this room were the city's wealthy elite, and they had all watched her tearful Instagram live video. They had all heard the fabricated stories about my cruelty, my alleged racism, and my supposed plot to render my elderly parents homeless. As I walked through the crowd, conversations died abruptly. Heads turned. Disgusted glares and judgmental stares tracked my every movement. I could hear the venomous whispers rippling through the crowd as I passed. That is the sister, the one who stole their retirement money. I cannot believe she actually had the nerve to show her face here tonight. She looks completely unhinged. Naomi is terrified of her. They parted for me, stepping back as if my crimson suit was highly contagious. A week ago, this kind of unified public rejection would have crushed me. I would have folded into myself, panicked, and run for the exit to escape their judgment. But tonight, their whispers were just meaningless background noise. These people were sheep blindly following the narrative fed to them by a desperate influencer and a bankrupt patriarch. They were judging me for refusing to drown alongside a family that had spent my entire life using me as a life raft. I did not lower my head. I did not shrink. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of absolute icy calm. I made direct, unflinching eye contact with a few of the most vocal whisperers watching them. Immediately look away, suddenly intimidated by the very woman they were just insulting. They expected a guilty, cowering outcast. I was giving them an untouchable titan. Donovan leaned in slightly, his voice a low hum over the classical music playing from the string quartet. They are looking at you like you are the devil, Jordan. Let them look, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. In about an hour, they are going to realize they have been drinking champagne on the Titanic, and I am the iceberg. I ignored the flashing cameras of the local bloggers. I ignored the hostile glares of my parents' country club friends. I kept my eyes fixed on the heavy brass-handled oak doors at the far end of the ballroom. That was the entrance to the exclusive VIP lounge. That was where my family was waiting to execute their grand public ambush. That was where they planned to corner me, threaten me, and force me to sign Vanguard Analytics over to Harrison to save his collapsing empire. I tightened my grip on the black leather clutch containing their absolute destruction. I did not break my stride. I marched directly through the hostile crowd, cutting a path straight toward the viper's nest, ready to burn it to the ground. The heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge swung shut behind me, instantly cutting off the classical music and the venomous whispers of the ballroom. The air inside the private suite was thick with expensive cologne and desperate ambition. My family stood arranged around a low mahogany table, positioned like a firing squad waiting for a blindfolded prisoner. Donovan Pierce stepped in silently behind me, closing the doors and taking his place by the wall, like an executioner awaiting his orders. Harrison stood at the center of the room, his chest puffed out, clutching a dark blue legal folder. Beverly sat on a velvet sofa, her hands folded primly in her lap, wearing a look of maternal disappointment that poorly masked her sheer greed. Trevor paced near the private bar, swirling a glass of scotch, looking arrogant and completely untouchable. Naomi stood directly beside my father, her arms crossed, the rented diamonds catching the dim light of the lounge. Harrison did not waste time with pleasantries. He stepped forward and threw the blue folder onto the glass table with a loud, aggressive smack. "Sign it, Jordan," he commanded, his voice dripping with the false authority he had used to bully me for 34 years. "Transfer the liquid assets and the executive voting rights of Vanguard Analytics to the Reed Logistics corporate umbrella. Do it right now, and we can put an end to this embarrassing tantrum you have been throwing all week." I walked slowly to the opposite side of the table, placing my black leather clutch down with deliberate care. You want me to sign over my entire company to save yours, I stated, keeping my voice perfectly flat. I am not asking you, Harrison growled, leaning heavily over the table. I am giving you a way out. If you do not sign that contract tonight, Naomi goes to the national press tomorrow morning. She has exclusive interviews lined up with 3 major television networks. She will expose your financial abuse, your bigotry, and your attempts to leave your elderly parents homeless. She will ruin your company for good. Vanguard Analytics will be a toxic wasteland by Monday morning. Naomi stepped out from behind my father, a malicious, triumphant smile stretching across her perfectly contoured face. She believed she held the ultimate trump card. You mess with a successful black woman's brand in this climate, you are finished, Jordan. Naomi sneered, her voice dripping with unearned superiority. The internet is already tearing you apart. My followers are demanding your resignation. You have zero public goodwill left. So just sign the paper, give the family what belongs to them, and go back to being a nobody. Trevor took a sip of his scotch and laughed, a loud, grating sound. You thought you could cut us off and play God, he mocked. You thought freezing a few credit cards made you powerful. But Dad and I already secured $3 million to stabilize the logistics fleet today. We outplayed you. We do not even need your cash right now. We just want the company. Sign it, Jordan. You lost. Beverly sighed heavily from the sofa, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. We just want to be a family again, sweetie, she cooed, her voice laced with poisonous fake sympathy. We know you are not equipped to handle a company of that size. You have always been so emotionally fragile. Let your father take the reins. We are doing this for your own good before you destroy yourself entirely. I looked at the 4 of them. It was a fascinating psychological study in pure, unadulterated delusion. Harrison thought he had leverage. Trevor thought he was a mastermind. Naomi thought she was an untouchable cultural icon. Beverly thought she was a saint. They were standing in a burning building demanding I hand over the deed to the ashes. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my character against Naomi's baseless, weaponized accusations. I did not explain to Trevor that the $3 million he bragged about was actually a federal wire fraud trap. I simply looked down at my wrist, adjusting the cuff of my crimson blazer, and checked my platinum Cartier watch. It was 7:55. 5 minutes until the bank executed the $15 million margin call on Harrison's operational accounts. 5 minutes until the federal agents in the lobby received their signal from Donovan. You are offering me a way out, I repeated, my tone laced with dark amusement. You brought me into a soundproof room to extort me for my intellectual property, using a fabricated social media campaign as blackmail. It is not blackmail, it is a business transaction, Harrison snapped, tapping the blue folder aggressively. You owe us this. I gave you life. I gave you a roof over your head. Now pay your debts and sign the paper before I introduce you to Preston Caldwell and officially announce our acquisition of Vanguard Analytics to the entire room. I looked directly into my father's eyes, dropping all pretense. You are completely bankrupt, Dad, I said, the words cutting through the tense air like a scalpel. You do not have a logistics empire. You have a massive, catastrophic margin call that is going to execute in exactly 4 minutes. You do not have the $15 million the bank is demanding. You brought me in here because Preston Caldwell is your absolute last hope, and he will not give you a single cent unless you can show him my company on your balance sheet. Harrison's face drained of color, his jaw locked. He had no idea how I knew the exact confidential figures of his private banking crisis. Trevor stopped swirling his scotch, his arrogant smirk faltering. Naomi's malicious smile slipped slightly as she looked between me and my father, sensing the sudden shift in power. You think you trapped me? I continued, resting my hands on the black leather clutch that held their actual doom. You think you cornered a scared, obedient daughter. You thought the threat of a public scandal would make me surrender my life work. But you did not invite a victim into this room. I checked my watch one more time. 7:58. I slowly ran my fingers over the smooth surface of their blue folder, never breaking eye contact with Harrison. I did not open it. I just slid it right off the edge of the mahogany table. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. I am not signing your extortion papers, Dad, I said, picking up my clutch. I am going to stand right here, and I am going to watch you try to pitch my company to Preston Caldwell. Harrison blinked, his aggressive posture faltering for a fraction of a second. His brain scrambled to process the absolute certainty in my voice. He opened his mouth to shout another threat to reassert his dominance over the daughter he viewed as a pawn, but he never got the chance. The heavy brass handles of the VIP lounge doors clicked loudly. The doors swung open with a smooth, silent glide slicing through the heavy tension in the room. Standing in the threshold was Preston Caldwell. He was the physical embodiment of unapproachable wealth. At 60 years old, Caldwell possessed a sharp, silver-haired elegance and cold, evaluating eyes that had dismantled entire corporations. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that made my father's expensive rental look like a cheap costume. He exuded the kind of quiet, terrifying authority that only comes from possessing billions of dollars in liquid capital. The transformation in my family was instantaneous and utterly repulsive. Harrison abandoned his intimidating stance immediately. The angry, red-faced tyrant vanished instantly, replaced by a fawning, desperate sycophant. He smoothed his lapels plastered on a wide, artificial smile and practically sprinted across the Persian rug toward the door. "Mr. Caldwell Harrison," exclaimed, his voice dripping with forced joviality and sheer desperation. "What an absolute honor. Thank you so much for coming to our anniversary gala. We have been so incredibly eager to sit down with you and discuss the future of Reed Logistics. You are exactly the visionary partner we need to to expand our company." Harrison extended his hand, ready to vigorously shake the hand of his billionaire savior. Preston Caldwell stepped fully into the VIP lounge. He did not smile. He did not return the greeting. He did not even look at my father's outstretched hand. He moved past Harrison with the effortless, dismissive grace of a man walking around a piece of broken furniture. Harrison stood frozen, his hands suspended awkwardly in the empty air, his artificial smile cracking at the edges. Preston stopped directly in front of me. The cold, evaluating stare he used to terrify executives vanished. He offered me a warm, deeply respectful nod, a gesture of absolute professional submission. "Good evening, Jordan," Preston said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I apologize for the delay. The final proxy signatures took a few minutes longer than anticipated, but I am pleased to report that the acquisitions are officially complete. The board has fully executed your directives. We control the debt." The silence that followed his words was absolute. It was a suffocating, crushing vacuum that sucked the oxygen straight out of the room. Harrison slowly turned around, his arm dropping to his side. His eyes darted frantically between Preston Caldwell, the untouchable billionaire, and me, the daughter he had just tried to extort. His mind was violently rejecting the data his eyes and ears were receiving. "Mr. Caldwell," Harrison stammered, his voice cracking with panic. "I think there has been a profound misunderstanding. You are speaking to my daughter. She is just an administrative employee. We are the ones who requested the meeting regarding the logistics investment." Preston finally turned his head to look at my father. The sheer contempt in his eyes was devastating. "There is no misunderstanding, Harrison," Preston replied, his tone laced with absolute disgust. "I am speaking to Jordan Reed, the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Analytics. She is a self-made industry titan. She is also the primary architect of my most profitable investment portfolio. I sit on her board of directors. I advise her corporate acquisitions. I work for her." Beverly let out a strangled, breathless gasp from the velvet sofa. She clutched her chest as if she had just been physically struck. Her perfectly manicured world was incinerating before her eyes. Trevor dropped his glass of scotch. It hit the thick carpet with a muted thud, spilling amber liquid across the floor. The arrogant smirk was entirely gone from his face, replaced by a pale, sickening realization of his own imminent destruction. Naomi stood rigid, her rented diamonds suddenly looking like a heavy chain around her neck. The smug, malicious influencer, who had confidently threatened to destroy my brand just 2 minutes ago, was now staring at Preston Caldwell in sheer, unadulterated terror. She finally understood that she had picked a fight with a woman who commanded billionaires. But Harrison stepped back, his hands shaking uncontrollably. You agreed to attend this gala to hear my pitch. You told my brokers you were interested in saving Reed Logistics. Preston let out a short, harsh laugh. I agreed to attend this gala because Jordan asked me to. She informed me that you were planning a hostile ambush to steal her company. She told me you were going to use my presence as leverage to force her to sign away her life work. I came here tonight to personally witness the audacity of a bankrupt, failed businessman attempting to extort my boss. Harrison looked like he was going to vomit. The color completely drained from his face, leaving a gray, sickly pallor. I have reviewed the financials of Reed Logistics. Harrison Preston continued driving the final nail into the coffin. Your company is absolute garbage. It is a burning liability built on reckless loans and sheer incompetence. You are facing a $15 million margin call in less than 2 minutes. I would not invest a single dime of my capital to save you from drowning. In fact, knowing how you treat your own daughter, I am going to thoroughly enjoy watching you sink. I stepped forward, breaking my silence. I picked up the blue folder from the floor, the extortion contract they had demanded I sign. I held it up for my father to see. You thought you could orchestrate a public execution, I said, my voice echoing with lethal precision. You thought bringing me into a room with the press waiting outside and a billionaire standing by would force me to surrender. You completely underestimated me, Dad. You always have. I tore the blue folder in half, dropping the shredded contract onto the glass table. The clock on my wrist ticked over to exactly 8 o'clock. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Donovan Pierce checked his tablet and offered me a sharp, victorious nod. The bank deadline had officially expired. Your margin call just defaulted, Dad. I announced, the words ringing out like a death sentence. The bank has officially locked your operational accounts. Harrison let out a choked, desperate sob, grabbing the edge of the table to keep himself from collapsing. But that is not the end of your night, I continued, turning toward the heavy oak doors. You promised Naomi a public spectacle. You wanted to leverage the media and the city elite. I am not going to let all those reporters go to waste. I looked at Naomi, whose eyes were wide with rising panic. It is time to go out there and face your followers, Naomi, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. We are going to the main stage, and I am going to show the entire city exactly who the Reed family really is. Let us go give them a show. The public stage was set. I walked out of the VIP lounge and took the microphone on the main stage of the gala. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge and stepped back out into the glittering ballroom. The immediate shift in atmosphere was palpable. A few minutes ago, I was the outcast parting a sea of hostile whispers. Now I was the tip of a spear. Donovan Pierce walked at my right shoulder. Preston Caldwell walked at my left. Behind us trailed the shattered remains of my family. Harrison moved like a man walking to the gallows. Trevor stumbled slightly, his face ashen. Naomi trailed behind them, her hands trembling as she clutched the rented silk of her evening gown. The string quartet was playing a lively waltz, but the music faltered and died out as the musicians noticed the procession. The hundreds of wealthy guests, banking executives, and local socialites turned their heads. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The clinking of crystal champagne glasses ceased entirely. The silence that descended upon the grand ballroom was absolute and suffocating. They could sense the shift in power. They saw Preston Caldwell, the billionaire they all worshipped, walking in lockstep with the woman they had spent the evening condemning. I did not stop to mingle. I marched directly toward the main presentation stage at the front of the room. The stage had been set up for Harrison to deliver his grand delusional speech about the enduring legacy of Reed Logistics. A massive digital projection screen displayed my father's corporate logo in bright, arrogant letters. I climbed the short flight of stairs, walked to the podium, and gripped the edges of the wooden stand. I leaned into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers and reverberating through the cavernous hall. "Thank you all for attending the 35th anniversary gala of Reed Logistics. My father, Harrison Reed, originally planned to stand up here tonight and pitch you an illusion. But I believe the people in this room prefer facts over fiction. Therefore, we are going to pivot from the scheduled marketing presentation to a live financial audit." I raised my hand and gave a subtle nod to the back of the room. My cybersecurity chief, Elias, had infiltrated the hotel audiovisual system an hour ago. The massive screen behind me flickered. The Reed Logistics logo vanished instantly. It was replaced by a stark high-definition dashboard displaying the certified banking records of Vanguard Analytics. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as they saw the nine-figure balances sitting in the corporate accounts. Before we discussed the terminal bankruptcy of my father's company, I continued my gaze sweeping over the audience until I found my target. "We need to address a very public, very viral smear campaign. Naomi, please step to the front of the stage." Naomi froze. The crowd physically parted around her, leaving her isolated in the center of the ballroom. The camera flashes from the society bloggers went off like strobe lights, capturing her sheer, unadulterated panic. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading, but I had no mercy left to give. "Yesterday, my sister-in-law launched a highly coordinated attack on my character," I announced to the silent room. "She sat on Instagram and told 800,000 followers that I was a racist, vindictive billionaire attempting to leave her homeless. She claimed her luxury lifestyle was the result of her hard work as an influencer, and that my financial boundaries were an act of toxic prejudice. Let us look at the receipts." The screen behind me shifted. It displayed a side-by-side comparison. On the left were screenshots of Naomi's most viral Instagram posts featuring her posing with a brand new Porsche, standing in front of a sprawling suburban estate, and unboxing vintage Chanel handbags. On the right side of the screen were the corresponding bank statements from my corporate shell company. I pointed to the massive display. "That Porsche you cried about losing the lease was paid directly from a Vanguard Analytics subsidiary account. The mortgage on your suburban mansion, paid in full every single month by the exact same fund. The clothes on your back, the lavish vacations you monetized, the private chefs you hired to maintain your digital aesthetic. Every single cent came from the pockets of the woman you just accused of oppression." The whispering in the crowd erupted into an audible roar. Socialites covered their mouths in shock. The local bloggers were frantically typing on their phones, broadcasting the live destruction of a major internet personality. Naomi tried to cover her face, but there was nowhere to hide. Her entire brand was built on the illusion of independent wealth, and I had just stripped her completely naked in front of the city elite. "But we are not finished, Naomi," I said, my voice cutting through the noise and forcing the room back into silence. "You thought your influencer platform made you untouchable. You thought your management team at Apex Influence would protect you. You clearly do not understand how corporate debt works." The screen changed again. It displayed the $4 million debt acquisition contract Vanguard Analytics had executed that very morning. The contract explicitly listed Apex Influence as the debtor. "Your public relations agency was millions of dollars in debt," I explained, looking down at my sister-in-law. "They were desperate for a bailout, so I bought their debt. Vanguard Analytics is now the primary creditor and functional owner of Apex Influence. Which means, as of this morning, I am your ultimate employer." Naomi let out a choked, devastated sob. She finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She had tried to wage a social media war against a financial titan. "Cancel me all you want on Instagram, Naomi," I declared, my words dropping like anvils onto the crowd, "because your digital career is officially over." 10 minutes ago, I exercised my rights as the majority creditor and instructed Apex Influence to terminate your management contract. They have legally dropped you as a client. They have canceled every single one of your active brand sponsorships. You have zero sponsors and zero income. I paused, letting the absolute finality of the statement sink into her mind. Then I delivered the final humiliating blow. And regarding the image of extreme wealth you wanted to project tonight, I added, gesturing toward her neck. That stunning diamond necklace you are wearing belongs to a high-end rental boutique. A boutique that happens to be an affiliate of Apex Influence. I canceled that rental agreement too. The retrieval agents are currently standing by the front coat check. The diamonds on your neck are being repossessed at the door. I highly suggest you hand them over before you leave, or they will have you arrested for grand theft. Naomi collapsed into a chair at the nearest table, burying her face in her arms as she broke down into hysterical, ugly tears. The illusion of the wealthy, oppressed influencer was completely incinerated. I had not just proven her a liar, I had systematically dismantled every single avenue of income and prestige she possessed. The crowd watched her cry, but there was no sympathy in their eyes. They had seen the bank statements. They knew she was a fraud. I turned my attention away from the weeping shell of my sister-in-law. I had neutralized the public relations threat. Now it was time to execute the main event. I looked past the broken figure of Naomi and locked eyes with my father. He was standing near the back of the room, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. Now that we have cleared up the social media distractions, I announced, tapping the podium. Let us talk about the real reason you were all invited here tonight. Let us talk about the $15 million margin call that Harrison Reed is currently defaulting on. The collective gasp that rippled through the ballroom at the mention of a $15 million margin call was deafening. In the elite circles of the city, defaulting on a margin call was not just a financial failure, it was the ultimate social disgrace. The carefully curated facade of the Reed family empire cracked wide open, exposing the absolute rot underneath. Trevor, who had been standing frozen beside the weeping shell of his wife, suddenly snapped. The fragile reality he had constructed around himself completely shattered. He still believed that the $3 million he had wired to his father earlier that day had magically fixed everything. He still believed he was the brilliant savior of the family legacy. The cognitive dissonance was too much for him to process. "Shut up!" Trevor roared, his voice cracking with raw panic and misplaced arrogance. He shoved past a table of startled banking executives and stormed toward the main stage. "You are lying. You are just trying to embarrass us because you are jealous. We do not have a margin call anymore. I paid the bank today. I secured the capital. I saved the logistics fleet. You know absolutely nothing." He reached the bottom of the stage steps. His face flushed an ugly, volatile red. He planted his foot on the first stair, intending to rush the podium and physically tear the microphone from my hands. He never made it to the second step. Donovan Pierce moved with terrifying, practiced speed. He stepped smoothly into Trevor's path, blocking the stairway entirely. But Donovan was not alone. The two men in tailored dark suits who had been standing quietly near the emergency exits suddenly converged on the stage. They moved with military precision, flanking my brother in a matter of seconds. "Get out of my way!" Trevor spat, attempting to shove past Donovan. "This is a private family event." Donovan did not even blink. He adjusted his silk tie and offered Trevor a smile that contained zero warmth. "This ceased to be a private family event the moment you utilized an interstate banking network to commit a Class 1 felony, Trevor. I highly suggest you keep your hands to yourself." Trevor froze, his eyes darting between Donovan and the two stern men flanking him. Confusion momentarily replaced his rage. I looked down at my brother from the podium, leaning into the microphone so my voice would carry to every corner of the silent, captivated ballroom. "My brother genuinely believes he is a tech entrepreneur," I announced to the crowd. "He believes he just orchestrated a brilliant multi-million-dollar corporate rescue to save his father's bankrupt logistics company. Let me show you all exactly what his brilliant business strategy entailed." I raised my hand. Elias, operating the audio-visual controls from the back of the room, instantly shifted the projection on the massive screen behind me. The bank statements vanished. They were replaced by a dark screen filled with cascading lines of complex green code. Next to the code was a highly detailed digital map showing a pulsing red tracking beacon. 5 years ago, I placed an outdated silver hard drive in the bottom drawer of my childhood desk. I explained, keeping my gaze locked on Trevor. That drive contained a fully functional foundational version of the predictive algorithm that powers Vanguard Analytics. It is the architectural blueprint of my entire financial technology empire. It was also heavily encrypted and laced with a military-grade tracking beacon. For half a decade, it sat untouched, until yesterday afternoon. Trevor's face drained of all color. The arrogant, self-righteous savior complex evaporated, replaced by the sickening realization that he had walked blindly into a trap. He stared at the screen as a detailed access log appeared showing the exact time, IP address, and location of the breach. My brother broke into my old desk. I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the hall. He stole that hard drive. He then connected it to his father's residential network and downloaded highly classified proprietary corporate intellectual property. But he did not stop at simple theft. Trevor was desperate to maintain his fake billionaire lifestyle. He needed cash. So he called the executive acquisition team at Apex Solutions, my largest corporate competitor. The screen shifted again. This time it displayed a digital contract bearing Trevor's electronic signature, positioned right next to a federal banking receipt for a wire transfer. Trevor sold my stolen algorithm to Apex Solutions for $3 million, I stated, laying out the irrefutable facts. He then immediately wired that stolen money into the Reed Logistics corporate accounts to temporarily stave off my father's catastrophic margin call. He committed corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and interstate wire fraud. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The city elite were witnessing a live, highly documented federal crime being exposed in high definition. "You cannot prove I knew what was on that drive," Trevor stammered, his voice weak and trembling. He was instinctively backing away from the stage, but the two men in dark suits stepped with him, boxing him in completely. "I just found it. It was in my parents' house." I gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward. "You signed a transfer agreement guaranteeing the authenticity of the code, Trevor. You negotiated the sale across state lines. But the most tragic part of your entire pathetic heist is that you did not even do your research. You were so blinded by your own greed that you failed to check the current ownership structure of the company you were selling to." I paused, letting the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds. Yesterday morning, I announced dropping the ultimate devastating hammer. Vanguard Analytics executed a massive silent proxy acquisition. We purchased 51.4% of the voting shares in Apex Solutions. I am the majority shareholder. I own the board. I own the company. Trevor stopped breathing. His eyes widened to a size that looked physically painful. "You stole my intellectual property," I said, pronouncing every word with lethal clarity. "And then you sold that stolen property back to me using my own money. And you left a flawless federal paper trail documenting every single second of your crime." The two men flanking Trevor smoothly reached into their tailored jackets. They simultaneously pulled out gold badges, letting them catch the light of the crystal chandeliers. "Trevor Reed?" The agent on the right said, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "We are special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrimes Division. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate trafficking of stolen property, and corporate espionage." "No." Trevor gasped, shaking his head frantically as the agents grabbed his arms and spun him around. "No, you cannot do this. Dad, tell them. Tell them the money was a loan. Dad." Harrison stood frozen near the center ice sculpture, utterly paralyzed. He could not save his golden boy. He could not even save himself. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs ratcheting shut around Trevor's wrists echoed through the grand ballroom. The sound severed the final thread of the Reed family's illusion. The society bloggers in the crowd raised their phones, their camera flashes erupting into a blinding storm of light. They were capturing the exact moment the fake startup founder was marched out of his own father's gala in federal custody. I watched him being dragged through the sea of horrified socialites. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. He had dug his own grave with his boundless entitlement. I simply handed him the shovel. I turned my eyes away from the exit and locked my gaze directly onto my father. The golden child was gone. It was time to deal with the patriarch. Harrison Reed stood rigidly by the melting ice sculpture, his chest heaving, as he struggled to process the total evaporation of his favorite son. For a long, agonizing minute, the reality of the situation fought a brutal war against his towering ego. I watched the exact second his delusion won. Instead of shrinking in shame, Harrison chose wrath. His face contorted into a mask of pure unadulterated fury. He shoved his way through the frozen crowd of banking executives and marched toward the stage. "You vindictive, ungrateful monster!" Harrison screamed, his voice tearing through the silent ballroom. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face purple with rage. "You orchestrated this entire circus just to humiliate us. You set your own brother up to be arrested. You are destroying the family legacy. Generations of hard work of building the Reed name, and you are burning it to the ground out of pure childish spite." The sheer audacity of his accusation was breathtaking. Even as the federal authorities dragged his son out in handcuffs for corporate espionage, Harrison still believed he was the righteous victim. He still believed the Reed name commanded respect. I did not raise my voice to match his screaming. I simply held out my hand. Donovan Pierce stepped forward and placed the third and final black leather folder into my palm. The first two folders had already dismantled Naomi and Trevor. This last one was the heaviest, containing the absolute financial ruin of the man shouting at me. I opened the folder and looked down at the crisp, legally binding documents resting inside. "You have no legacy, Dad," I stated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling with absolute glacial authority. "You have debt." Harrison stopped at the edge of the stage, his chest heaving. He glared at me, trying to maintain his posture of dominance, but his hands were shaking violently at his sides. "You built an illusion of wealth by borrowing against assets you mismanaged for over a decade." I continued, looking directly into his panicked eyes. "You ran Reed Logistics into the ground 7 years ago. The only reason this company survived this long was because I was secretly pumping $250,000 a month into your operating accounts. When I cut off that supply 3 days ago, your bank issued a $15 million margin call." The crowd of investors and socialites behind him gasped collectively. In this room, exposing a margin call of that magnitude was the equivalent of announcing a terminal disease. The wealthy elite physically stepped back, creating a wide, empty circle around my father, as if his financial ruin was a highly contagious virus. "Trevor thought he was saving you," I said, tapping the documents in the open folder. "He stole my proprietary algorithm and sold it for $3 million. But the $3 million Trevor stole could not cover your margin call. It was a drop in the bucket of your catastrophic financial negligence. The deadline for your payment was exactly 48 hours after the notice was issued." I checked my watch, then looked back down at him. "That deadline expired at 5 o'clock this evening." Harrison opened his mouth to argue, to project more false bravado, but no words came out. The truth was finally piercing through his armor of denial. "Your logistics company was legally seized by the bank at 5 o'clock today," I announced, projecting the reality of his ruin to every single person in the room. "The commercial fleet is grounded. The corporate accounts are permanently frozen. The company you are supposedly celebrating tonight no longer belongs to you." "But the bank did not want to hold on to your toxic debt," I added, feeling a cold, profound satisfaction rising in my chest. "They wanted to liquidate the liability immediately, so they placed it on the private market, and the bank sold the debt to me." Harrison staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. He bumped into a cocktail table, sending a tray of crystal champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The shattering glass sounded like gunshots in the quiet ballroom, but nobody moved to help him. Preston Caldwell stood silently at the edge of the stage, watching the execution with a look of grim approval. He had spent his life destroying bloated, inefficient corporations, but even he seemed impressed by the absolute surgical precision of this dismantling. I reached into the folder and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. I held them up for the entire room to see, then dropped them off the edge of the stage. They fluttered down, landing directly at Harrison's feet. "Those are the official foreclosure and asset seizure notices," I said, my voice relentless and sharp. "Through my holding company, I purchased the entirety of your defaulted loans. I now hold the deed to every single asset you used as collateral. You are officially bankrupt, and your mansion belongs to my LLC." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Harrison stared down at the papers on the floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. The man who had spent his entire life demanding respect and instilling fear was now completely hollowed out. He was standing in a rented tuxedo in a ballroom he could not afford, celebrating a company he no longer owned. Suddenly, a piercing wail shattered the silence. Beverly pushed her way through the crowd, her elaborate evening gown catching on the chairs as she stumbled toward the stage. The realization of her total destitution had finally broken her mind. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the sprawling estate, everything that defined her existence had just been legally incinerated. Beverly collapsed to the floor right next to the foreclosure papers. She did not kneel gracefully. She fell hard, her knees hitting the carpet as she dissolved into ugly, hysterical sobs. She grabbed the edge of the stage, looking up at me with mascara running down her face. "Jordan, please!" Beverly wailed, her voice cracking with sheer terror and desperation. "Please, you cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. I am your mother. Please have mercy. Do not throw us out on the street. We will do whatever you want. We will apologize. Just please give us the house back." She was begging. The woman who had marched police officers into my penthouse to have me falsely arrested just days ago was now groveling at my feet in front of the most powerful people in the city. She was using the very concept of family she had weaponized against me my entire life to shield herself from the consequences of her own greed. I looked down at her. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel a shred of daughterly affection. I just saw a parasite that had finally been separated from its host. I closed the empty black folder and handed it back to Donovan. I looked down at the sobbing, broken woman on the floor and the silent, ruined man standing next to her. "You called me a failure," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "Look at you now." I turned my back on the scene unfolding on the ballroom floor. I did not wait for security to escort them out. I simply walked straight out of the Grand Hotel with Donovan at my side, stepping out into the cool night air. As I slid into the leather backseat of my car, I felt a profound silence settle in my chest. The war was officially over. Fast forward exactly 1 month. The dust from the gala had settled, but the crater it left in the corporate landscape was massive. The fallout was swift and entirely public. Trevor was sitting in a federal holding facility awaiting trial. Donovan ensured the prosecution had an airtight case. Trevor faced multiple counts of federal wire fraud, interstate trafficking of stolen property, and corporate espionage. The $3 million he transferred had been seized by the government. Without my trust fund to foot the bill, he was forced to rely on a public defender. The arrogant tech founder persona had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified man facing 15 years in federal prison. Naomi did exactly what parasites do when the host dies. She jumped ship. The morning after the gala, she filed for divorce, desperately trying to distance herself from the indictment. But jumping ship did not save her from drowning. Because I owned her public relations agency, her career as a luxury influencer was permanently terminated. Every single sponsor dropped her. The rental companies repossessed her designer wardrobes, the jewelry, and the luxury vehicles. Naomi walked away with absolutely nothing. Last week, my security team confirmed she was now working a minimum wage retail job at a department store. She spends 8 hours a day folding clothes she used to pretend she could afford. She tried to go live on a new account to complain about her downfall, but without the glitz and glamour, her audience simply did not care. The internet moved on, and Naomi was erased from relevance. As for Harrison and Beverly, their descent into obscurity was catastrophic. The bank executed the asset seizure with ruthless efficiency. The commercial fleet was liquidated. The suburban mansion was foreclosed on, and the locks were changed within 72 hours. I authorized my holding company to acquire the property and put it back on the market. I had no desire to keep a monument to my childhood misery. My parents were stripped of everything that defined their arrogant existence. The country club revoked their membership due to unpaid dues and the sheer embarrassment of their public bankruptcy. Their wealthy friends entirely cut them off. High society treats financial ruin like an infectious disease, making Harrison and Beverly suddenly toxic. They were forced to move into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood. There were no more imported wines, no more tailored suits, and no more grand delusions of a logistics empire. They were just two broke, bitter people forced to face the reality of their incompetence. I stood on the sprawling terrace of my penthouse, feeling the warm evening breeze wash over me. The city skyline stretched out in every direction, a glittering testament to the empire I had built. I held a crisp white envelope in my hand. It had arrived in the mail that morning, forwarded through my corporate office. The handwriting belonged to my mother. It was a desperate, pleading letter. I could tell just by looking at the frantic, messy scrawl of my name on the front. A month ago, I might have opened it to see what new manipulation tactic she was trying to deploy. I might have read it to gloat over her misery. But standing there on the balcony looking out over my city, I realized I simply did not care. The opposite of love is not hate. It is total, absolute indifference. I did not open the envelope. I did not read a single word of her desperate apologies or her inevitable demands for financial mercy. I walked back inside my penthouse, stepped up to the heavy-duty paper shredder in my home office, and dropped the sealed envelope right into the slot. The machine whirred to life, grinding my mother's final attempt at manipulation into worthless confetti. I smiled, feeling the last invisible chain holding me to the Reed family snap and dissolve into dust. I walked out of the office and into my grand dining room. The space was filled with the sound of genuine laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the rich aroma of a private chef preparing a feast. I was hosting a dinner party, but this time the guest list was entirely my own. Donovan Pierce sat at the head of the table, arguing playfully with Elias about corporate cybersecurity protocols. Preston Caldwell was engaged in a deep conversation with my chief operating officer. The room was filled with my loyal employees, my trusted mentors, and the genuine friends who had stood by me when I had absolutely nothing. This was my chosen family. They were a circle of brilliant, driven, and supportive people who valued me for my intellect and my character, not for what they could extract from my bank accounts. I picked up a glass of vintage champagne from the marble counter and joined them at the table. The conversation naturally quieted down as they turned to look at me. I raised my glass, the crystal catching the ambient light of the chandelier. To Vanguard Analytics, I said, my voice ringing clear and full of absolute joy. To building empires from scratch, and most importantly, to the family we choose for ourselves. To the family we choose, the entire table echoed back in perfect, harmonious unison. I took a slow sip of the champagne. It tasted like victory. It tasted like peace. I looked around the room at the people who respected me, and I knew that I had finally won the only game that mattered. I was completely, unapologetically, and entirely free. The harrowing journey of Jordan Reed highlights a profound and often painful truth: sharing DNA does not automatically make someone family. For years, Jordan sacrificed her own well-being, working herself to the point of hospitalization, just to fund the extravagant lifestyles of relatives who offered her nothing but disdain and entitlement. The central lesson to be drawn from her ordeal is the absolute necessity of establishing unyielding boundaries to protect one's self-worth and hard-earned success. Society frequently conditions us to believe that family loyalty must be unconditional, demanding endless forgiveness and sacrifice. However, Jordan's story demonstrates that when familial relationships become parasitic and emotionally abusive, walking away is not an act of cruelty, but a crucial step of self-preservation. By cutting off the financial supply that enabled her family's toxic behavior, Jordan reclaimed her agency. She proved that true power does not come from accommodating those who disrespect you, but from recognizing your own value and refusing to be diminished. Moreover, her ultimate victory wasn't merely about financial retribution or executing corporate takeovers. It was about the profound peace she found upon shedding the immense weight of her family's expectations. She replaced a toxic biological dynamic with a chosen family, loyal friends and colleagues who valued her character and intellect over her bank account. This narrative serves as a powerful reminder that our worth is not dictated by those who fail to appreciate us. We hold the pen to our own life stories, and we have the undeniable right to remove the characters who only seek to drag us down. If you have ever felt undervalued or exploited by the people who should support you the most, take a step back today and evaluate whether it is time to finally draw your own line in the sand.